Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Yountville Town Council meeting for Tuesday, February 6, 2018. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order and ask our clerk for a roll call, please.
Councilmember Durham. Here. Councilmember Norman. Here. Councilmember Moeller. Here. Vice Mayor Dornbecker. Here. Mayor Dunbar.
Here. And in early recognition of the Vice Mayor's upcoming birthday, I invite Vice Mayor Dornbecker to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Oops. You okay back there, Joe?
I'm fine. Sorry.
Next up is the adoption of our agenda for this evening. Is there a motion to adopt? If so, please hit that button.
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Please vote on the adoption of tonight's agenda. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We are going to start with a proclamation, and I don't see our recipient in the audience, but I do want to recognize Diane Page for her service on the Park and Rec Advisory Commission. We do have a certificate of appreciation, and I'll just go ahead and quickly read that. The Town Council and staff express a sincere thank you for your contributions and service to the town of Yountville as a member of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission, serving between February 2014 and January 2018. And we will make sure to get that to Diane. So thank you very much. If I can just pass it over to the clerk. Now would be a time if any member of the public would like to address the council on an item that's not on our agenda this evening. Seeing none, we will move right ahead to our consent calendar. We have 4 items. Is there an action on the consent calendar? Anyone?
Move approval of the consent calendar.
A second.
All in favor, please vote. That passes also. Excellent. So we're going to move right ahead to our presentation, which is my State of the Town address for 2017. I won't do that. There are too many jokes, too many memes. If I get dry mouth, so be it. Vision for the past, for the present, and for the future. That's one word that describes my look back at 2017 in the town of Yountville. We remember in myriad ways the people, places, and events that helped shape the community we enjoy every day. We tipped our hats to members of the original Bracero agricultural workforce when they served as grand marshals for our Yountville Days Parade. We celebrated the renovation of Veterans Memorial Park and the notable veteran-themed elements, landscaping, and open spaces that were added for reflection, recreation, and entertainment. We bid farewell to some of the most influential residents who helped shape our community. The impacts on our town by Steve Bartisono, Don Schmidt, Gene Chinascia, and Ray Monty, to name a few, will live on for generations. The doors closed at Pacific Blues after more than 2 decades, giving us a chance to celebrate Jeff Steen and his family for the passion and generosity they shared with us over the years. Focusing our vision on recent days, we see renovations and development in our business sector spanning the length of town. Modifications at Napa Valley Lodge, Vintage House, and Villaggio have refreshed some of our largest lodging properties. Construction of the RH Lifestyle Gallery continues, while ground was broken on one of the last commercial parcels in town for the Handwritten Wines, tasting room, and retail building. Several commercial spaces took on new looks, including Mini Model Bakery, Southside Cafe, Platform 8, JCB Salon Privé, and 4510. Longtime resident and iconic restaurateur Thomas Keller, along with local chef Philip Tessier, changed toques to help lead Team USA's Matthew Peters and Harrison Tyrone to our nation's first ever gold medal in the Bocuse d'Or International Culinary Competition in Lyon, France. Over several months last year, I worked closely with parents, town residents, school staff, and Napa Valley Unified School District officials to create a viable and sustainable roadmap for the long-term success at Yountville Elementary School, and that effort continues. Another significant ongoing effort is dialogue with Calvet leadership, local administrators, the town, and other potential partners regarding a comprehensive review of facilities and services at the Yountville Veterans Home. I have been involved directly in conversations, testifying before the Governor's Little Hoover Commission and the Assembly Veterans Affairs Committee as recently as last week, that will help the 133-year-old campus provide for the needs of a shifting generation of veterans. Building a new skilled nursing facility tops the list of upgrades and updates of buildings, living quarters, and support services. Housing development, especially for the home's workforce and for veterans, is another key target. The Memory of a Tree mural located in the Highway 29 underpass became a reality, concluding more than a decade of discussion about how to beautify that part of our town's entrance. The Festival of Lights changed formats from a single-day street fair to 6 weeks of holidays in Yountville, while the dazzling town-wide lighting helped get us all in the holiday spirit. Transitioning to such a festive atmosphere never was so welcome as in 2017. We all needed a mental and emotional reset following the October firestorm and its lingering effects on the Napa Valley and our neighbors in Sonoma County. Most of us probably expected our early year winter floods would be the toughest natural challenge we would face last year. That changed on October 8th in the unsettling days that followed. Nothing exposes the character or compassion in people or in a community like a crisis. The behavior of friends, neighbors, and business owners who rallied to help each other and even total strangers was remarkable. Hotels offered up rooms, chefs cooked for first responders, and locals checked on each other's welfare and comfort. All this happened while we dealt with the loss of power, phone, and internet service, and the wind and fire behavior not seen around here for decades. From that, we can all share a sense of gratitude and pride. In 2017, we also began analyzing our vision for the future. Through the Envision Yountville General Plan Update process, an impressive level of engagement was shown by our residents, who started the conversation in a series of workshops and advisory committee meetings to review and craft priorities and policies that will guide us forward for decades. Working with a balanced budget and a commitment to maintaining prudent reserves, the town continued to invest in our public infrastructure, installing solar panels at the community center and wastewater treatment plant, replacing failing street surfaces, and upgrading our water and sewer lines allow us to continue to deliver municipal services at the highest level. Our Public Works team developed plans to invest even more as we prepare to receive Measure T and Senate Bill 1 funds dedicated to improving our sidewalks, streets, and other transportation projects. Real estate prices rose to a record high, and we watched quite a bit of renovation activity of existing homes and the building of infill housing. We adopted a rental registration program for better oversight and understanding of the impacts rental properties have in our neighborhoods. Another ongoing discussion surrounds a newly legalized agricultural crop. Together as a community, we will evaluate new policies to allow and regulate commercial and personal use of cannabis. A sold-out crowd again enjoyed the Residents' Bash at the community center, catered by local restaurant and wine partners. It has not taken long for this to become an annual must-attend party for locals. Yountville also was the site for the Be Kind Walk, organized by young sisters Tallulah and Ruby Finkelstein of Napa, encouraging people to spread friendship and community spirit during a time of divisive national discourse. Our Golden Ticket program has inspired many of our residents to get more involved in our recreational programs and to enjoy healthy, happy, and active lifestyles at a very low cost. We continue to enjoy a robust art experience here in town with new art walk sculptures and live events produced by our Arts Commission. the Yountville Live Music, Food, and Wine Festival, as well as the inaugural Yountville International Short Film Festival, provide a diverse level of entertainment for locals and visitors. To summarize my theme of vision, I offer this anonymous Greek proverb: society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. I express my thanks for this community's vision that has led us for more than 50 years and will help us write the next chapters of Yountville's history. Thank you. Thank you all very much. So with that, we are going to move ahead to our public hearing for this evening, Stuart Sellers Use Permit Amendment. Nathan.
Great. So thank you. Before you this evening is the first application of a use permit amendment about the wine tasting pilot program. What I want to do before you is a very detailed staff report. What I'll be doing right now is just providing a few brief highlights related to that staff report. So on February of last year, the Town Council amended the town's parking standards to require off-street parking based off a business's use area, indoors and out, rather than just the floor area ratio like it's been for years, to better approximate the parking demand for the use. And as part of that agenda item, the Town Council discussed a potential pilot program for wine tasting rooms, in particular those tasting rooms that allow their guests to utilize on-site open space, even though the open space is not designated as use area under the approved use permit. During that meeting, the council directed staff to explore the possibility of a tasting room pilot program. Then on November 7th of last year, the Town Council amended the parking ordinance to allow an increase or decrease in the number of parking spaces by the Town Council, pursuant to an advisory checklist developed by the planning and building staff regarding the review and approval of reduced or increased parking requirements. Staff then developed this checklist, and on December 5th, 2017, the Town Council adopted Resolution 173447, which establishes this advisory checklist for wine tasting rooms, therefore creating this pilot program. And that would allow a reduction in the number of required off-street parking spaces. The resolution established the checklist and stated that it would take effect when an existing wine tasting room applies for a use permit amendment to extend the business's permitted use area to include a portion of open space without applying the town's parking standards established in the municipal code. Now, also according to the resolution, the use permit amendment would be granted only if the Town Council could make certain findings. These findings are outlined in the context of this application in your staff report, and that is really what I'm going to focus on for this verbal part of the staff report. On January 3rd, staff received an application for a use permit from Stuart Sellers to allow wine tasting service in their open space area and to not apply the town's parking standard. So, therefore, these findings that were established in the advisory checklist would be applied to this. And so the council has in your packet the detailed staff report. Right now I'm going to provide just a few highlights and focus on these required findings and how they would apply to this application. So first required finding said that the business is unable to meet the required parking demand set forth in the municipal code with the addition of the proposed use area expansion. Stuart Sellers is proposing to do wine service in their outside courtyard area. According to the submitted project narrative, which is also attached in your packet, the applicant has said, Stuart Sellers parking lot spaces have been designed for the most dense use of the space with a total of 17 spaces. We are currently unable to add additional spaces without negatively impacting the ability to accommodate a range of cars, makes, and models while maintaining a functional and safe parking lot. Staff concurs that the parking area has been developed and striped to capacity as shown here on the attached site plan. This is where all of the parking spaces currently are, if you've ever been there in the rear. This was early in the morning. I did that on purpose so you could see the stripes there. It's usually much more occupied than that. So Stuart Sellers, the employees park in this southern corner here of the lot pursuant to the terms of the business's employee parking management plan, which the business is already enrolled in. And this leaves the remainder of the lot available for guests. If the parking standard were to be applied to the courtyards, so this area here that they're proposing to include wine service, the business would need to create at least an additional 16 parking spaces, nearly doubling the parking requirement that's already there. Because the rear lot is already striped to capacity, Stewart Cellars would not be able to meet this additional parking demand, which is exactly what the first finding is supposed to say. Should be noted, though, that the development created 6 additional on-street diagonal spaces on Washington Street, over on this side. These spaces were not counted toward the development's parking demand because they are in the right-of-way, but they do serve to accommodate the business's guests. Staff is of the opinion that the applicant's application satisfies this finding. Now, the second finding states that the business's guests must already use the open space regularly, according to the provisions of the existing approved use permit. Customers of Stewart Cellars and Southside Cafe regularly use the courtyard space, particularly in the warmer seasons, you'll see, but even now it's packed. Pursuant to the Stewart use permit, guests are permitted to use the outdoor seats for unserviced wine tastings, which means they sit there. If they want to have a wine tasting, they must go indoors, receive the pour, and then take the glass back outside. The purpose of this application is to have the pouring occur outside without having the parking standard applied. There's currently 50 seats in the courtyard area that serves both businesses, Stewart Cellars and Southside Cafe. That's because both businesses operate under the same use permit. So those 50 seats operate or work for both of them. Staff is of the opinion that the applicant's application satisfies this required finding. Clearly, customers are already using the open space regularly. Third, permitting employee service to guests in the outdoor use area would not require any additional staffing. The applicant has submitted project narrative that states that the outdoor wine tasting would not require any additional staffing than what they have right now. And the applicant has indicated and submitted to town staff a proof of payroll to verify that there are only 7 employees there, and with up to 5 employees for any one shift. Staff is of the opinion that the applicant's application may satisfy this required finding, but also recommends a condition of approval, which you'll see in the resolution attached to the report, that includes monthly reporting to the planning staff for 1 year after implementation of the project approval, that the number of employees has not exceeded 7. So again, just first of the month, telling town staff, yes, here's the proof of payroll, how many employees we really have, to verify that this hasn't increased the demand for additional employees. The fourth one says, permitting the business staff to use the open space as use area would not negatively affect the noise, lighting, safety, or business practices of neighboring properties. The business's use permit allows use of the courtyard until dark and indoor activity until 10 p.m. There was a little typo in the staff report that said use of the courtyard until 10 p.m. Don't know how that got there. It's use of the courtyard until dark and indoor activity until 10 p.m. And that applies to both the cafe as well as the tasting building, if they so choose. Because guests already use the courtyard area, it is unlikely that permitting service in the courtyard area will negatively impact neighbors. There are already guests using it. And there are no additional developments proposed as parts of this application, so lighting would remain the same. It's unlikely that outdoor service would result in increased levels of noise that would affect neighbors, as they are still meant to be closed at dark and only after up until 10 p.m. indoors. The levels of noise would not raise or safety or business practice any concerns with that. And staff is of the opinion that the applicant's application does satisfy this required finding as well. The fifth required finding states that the use permit amendment will enhance the atmosphere of the streetscape and improve the overall experience for the business staff and passers-by. Because guests already use the courtyard, permitting service would make the courtyard livelier. Since the opening of Southside Cafe in mid-December, guests' use of the courtyard has increased, which serves as a draw for pedestrians. If you're walking in that side of town, you can see people using that outdoor space, it naturally draws the eye to that area. Additional activity associated with Stewart Cellars is expected to create a more inviting environment. An active streetscape is generally seen as a positive element to most communities, and an active open courtyard, such as the one being considered this evening, would contribute to the activity of the streetscape. And so staff is also of the opinion that this application satisfies this required finding. Again, I took this picture early in the morning because it's visible from Washington Street. Okay. The sixth finding that was included in the resolution of the Town Council stated that any findings necessary or advisable on a case-by-case basis to address the particular factors and circumstances of the applicant's business, operation, or location. Staff is not recommending any additional findings that would be specific to this particular application. However, the Town Council may reserve the right to make any additional findings for this application as it sees fit. That's why this is included. So those are the 6 findings that would be discussed this evening. Again, like I've said, staff is of the opinion that this application does meet these findings, so that's why a resolution to approve it is in your packet. You'll notice that there's some conditions of approval in there. I just want to briefly go over those, and then we'll be ready to have questions, and I'll stop talking, unless you want me to keep talking. It's up to you. So, some of these conditions include no food service should occur in the open space beyond which is already permitted under the existing use permit for the space. So, if Stewart Cellars now wants to start doing food, that would need an additional use permit amendment. This does not grant any privilege beyond what is already existing. Southside does it, and that's what's there right now. Beyond that would not be permitted under this use permit. The maximum number of seats permitted in the property's open space, regardless of the use of the seats, whether it is Stewart Cellars or Southside, we wrote there, shall not exceed 50. 50 is what is there right now. That number can be modified by council if they so wish, but right there is not to exceed 50 because that's the impact that we know exists right now. Applicant shall provide a monthly report due the first of every month to verify that the number of employees has not increased. We've reviewed that, and so that's also there in your resolution. And then the last one is kind of a catch-all. If conditions in the business change during the first year of operation, which would affect or alter any of the findings made by the Town Council, then the amendment to the use permit may be revoked. If we're satisfied making these findings today, but then anything in the next 12 months makes it so one of these is not true, then the use permit could be revoked. So that is the staff report. I'll leave this up here so we can reference these 6 required findings, and right now staff is available to take your questions.
Thanks. Questions? Yes. Councilmember Durham.
So the main impetus of all this in the past has been because of parking, because of employees, and what that would require on the property. So we have the applicant has agreed to payroll reports every month, and I would assume moving forward that as other applicants move forward, if this is all based on employee parking and the amount of employees, moving forward, we're probably going to require that of any tasting room or business that's going to want this modification. Is that fair to say?
I think that's a fair precedent to set.
So,
We actually did already say that in the previous conversation with the council.
Correct. Okay. So, with that being said, if it's going to be in the resolution number 4, it just says applicant shall provide a monthly report. So Mr. Stewart sells his property in 3 months. The new buyer gets this. What is a monthly report to them? An Excel spreadsheet that they can put any numbers into. My point being is, should we be making this a little bit more specific, that we want documentation from a third-party payroll company to verify the number of employees every month? That's my only thought on that.
Yeah.
So that's just my question statement.
Right. And any of the conditions in the resolution could be modified by the Town
Yeah,
Council.
we can consider that when we discuss. Yeah. Any other questions before I open the public hearing? Vice Mayor, and then
I did, in reading the report, it looked like that was part of a program that would be, time specific, so that we'd be monitoring it for a year. Are you saying that this is going to be monitored, ad infinitum?
When it comes to number of employees, we're expecting that monthly report, which in this case would be a proof of payroll for number of employees. We'd expect that to see monthly for the first 12 months.
For the first 12 months, and then after that?
Well, after that, the program already takes part in the annual use permit monitoring program, which every business in town does, where there are annual meetings where we would check in on these things.
Okay.
And so rather than it becoming monthly thing because they've shown good faith in the first 12 months,
That's
it
what
would
I
become
was
annual meetings.
interested in finding out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. I have some questions more specific to the south side piece of this. It's an interesting puzzle given the mixed use of this, and our ordinance goes only to tasting rooms. So what is the current outside use allowed by Southside?
Right now, Southside Cafe is permitted to do limited service, similar to Protea would be a comparable business plan where you make the order inside and they're allowed to bring that order. That's it.
And are they allowed to serve all 50 seats?
Right now, the 50 seats is for the entire use. So it kind of is a first come, first serve approach. If the cafe, if they sit on a rear seat or another seat, we haven't identified what is a Stewart Cellar seat and what is a Southside Cafe seat because they do operate under the same use permit. When Gather Cafe was in there, that was approved all in the same use permit as Stewart Cellars.
Right. So I guess my question is there or are you aware of some sort of allocation of seating, even if it's by contract, as between the restaurant and the tasting room? And you may not be aware of it. I'll also ask the applicant. So are you aware of any allocation of seating? Because I think the staff report mentions 17 and 33.
Because that's what's there right now. If you go out, there's a clear type of seats that look more cafe-ish, for lack of a better word, and there's 17 of those, and the remaining of the seats look to be at about 33, so it'd be 50 total. That said, there's nothing forcing one customer of one business saying, this is Southside seating, this is Stewart Cellar seating, because it does operate under the same use permit.
Okay.
I'll jump in and share a little
Sure.
more information.
Perfect. Thank you.
After Gather Cafe had left and the landlord was in discussions with Southside Cafe, they wanted some level of assurance that they could provide this enhanced limited service treatment to its guests. And so we looked at whether there was sufficient parking to allow that based on the square footage of the four walls of the business, as well as the number of seats that could be accommodated in the parking lot. So it's really a parking issue that allocates 17 seats to that restaurant. But as Nathan mentions, that it's basically on a first come, first served basis. So if all 50 seats were used by Southside before Stewart got to them, that would be satisfied under the town's parking standard and their use permit. How it may be used by their own agreement, we're not privy to those specifics.
Thank you. So refresh my memory on what is an enhanced limited service restaurant.
Enhanced limited service allows the employees to take the food and serve the guests outside rather than the guests going inside to pick up their plate.
And can they come out and ask, would you like something else? Can we refill your water or soda?
They aren't refilling water or soda.
Okay. So then, under the use permit, as I understand it, for the mixed use, it says, one item says, only prepackaged food shall be permitted for the wine tasting use. There shall be no food preparation on the premises for this use. Consumption of prepared foods shall be limited to special events and shall be prepared by an off-site food provider. So by that remaining in place, does that mean that it would not be allowed under the ordinance proposed tonight for someone to get a sandwich at Southside and combine that with a tasting flight, both on the patio at the same table at the same time?
That's how I understand it.
I would jump in and disagree.
Okay.
I believe
That's why I'm
that,
asking the question. I'm trying to figure
what
out.
that is intended is to limit the Stewart Cellars food service, so they can't do daily wine and food pairings. That's not the extent of the wine tasting use that they are permitted. Food is allowed at special events. But if someone were to independently purchase a sandwich and enjoy it while they're tasting wine within space that is controlled by Stewart Cellars and is in line with their ABC permit, that would be fine under our use permit, their use permit.
Okay, so we could create a situation in which a group of 4 people grabs a lunch and grabs 4 tastings and enjoys the combined experience outside.
Well, that can already happen.
Well, can it already happen?
Yeah, we have not said that that can't happen. It's, as Sandra said, it's additional Stewart Cellars generated food service that has been limited.
Okay, so it can already happen in that there can be food and wine at the same table, but the patron or the client cannot get up. But the Stewart person, neither the Stewart employee nor the Southside employee can come to the table to take additional orders. Is that the current state of affairs?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And this would still restrict the cafe employee from doing that, but it would allow the Stewart Cellars to service the tasting, the wine tasting only.
Thank you, thank you.
Any other questions? So we'll go ahead and open the public hearing and invite the applicant if you'd like to speak to the issue before we hear from others in the room. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I can still say Happy New Year, right? Even though it's
It's February, no.
maybe really
Chinese
right.
New Year.
Okay, so I'm James Stewart from Stewart Cellars, and everything is pretty much like you were saying. I wanted to get up and sort of re-verify for everyone that we're not adding additional employees. To Councilmember Durham's question, we actually did provide third-party data, just to be fully transparent. We don't expect to, we're not adding any more seats. Really, the only thing that we're doing here is providing a better customer experience so that, if somebody did grab something at Southside but they wanted to do a wine tasting, we are not allowed to do like a full glass pour. So if they wanted a 2-ounce pour or they wanted to do a tasting, they'd have to get up from their lunch like over and over and over again and come inside. And we just want to remove that barrier to their customer experience. We think that it would enhance the atmosphere of our community, but also we do get dinged sometimes on reviews online about that part of the experience. Let's see here. I wanted to kind of give some transparency to the ABC laws. So we are unable and we'll never be able to do food and wine pairing together. So even if our permit were to say, we can combine food that we make on site with wine, the ABC laws will not allow that to happen. So there's automatically like a very strong barrier to that for our business and any other, I think, because I believe the requirement is you have to have an active winery on the premises in order to have food prepared on the premises as well. In addition to the ABC laws, Southside is not allowed to serve alcohol, and alcohol is not allowed into their building. So the entire property is permitted by the ABC for Stewart Cellars to be the only person serving alcohol within the limitations of a 2-ounce pour, and we don't even do 2-ounce pours. So, we're being pretty conservative. The space is, pretty much already being used on a daily basis, and really we just want to sort of have the ability to, provide a better experience. And I think it would help our business as well at this point because the fire situation, we pretty much lost like 4 months of reservations all at once. So anything that we can do at this point to kind of, help improve things, especially just in general, the north end of town, we would be very grateful for. I think I've covered everything, but if there are any other questions, I'm pretty much an open book on this, so please let me know.
Thank you. Questions of the applicant? Councilmember Mueller?
Yes.
One of the, we've had these things come up in some other wine tasting rooms pretty close to your facility and also the other end of the street. And this is before, you're the first one that, if you prevail tonight, we'll be allowed to do this.
I'm the test subject.
We'll see how the council ends up voting. But when outside service has been allowed before, or they could take their glass out, excuse me, we end up seeing sometimes the employee will actually be serving them outside. And we routinely hear, oh, we really need to retrain our employees, but we hear it over and over and over again. Can you just tell me how you plan on addressing that you will make sure that your employees really know what can happen and what can't happen?
Yes.
If you
So,
fail tonight.
are we talking about sort of in the current state of our permit, or if this were to be approved?
If this would be approved, yeah.
Yeah.
So any deviations,
Absolutely.
You know, it's
Yeah,
just-
so our primary concern is maintaining our permit with the California ABC, and then also our use permit here in town. Any violation of that would put our license to even be able to serve alcohol anywhere in the state up for risk. And then also our use permit here could be withdrawn. So in order to maintain a viable business, and also for our employees to, and we make sure they understand this, have their jobs, they cannot put our family business at risk of basically losing our ability to sell our product. We have staff meetings every Friday, and where we're continually addressing any issues that come up. Our current team of employees have been with us for long enough now to where we have a pretty tight ship. I've only ever seen one infraction before, because somebody saw our December meeting and thought that things were cleared. And I quickly stopped it and called Steve and was like, I saw this. I want to let you know I saw this. We handled it. If we ever see it again, you'll be the first to know. So again, just with the idea of being transparent and like getting out in front of issues before they become larger issues is something I've learned by being a member of the community is like very, very important. Also, we have neighbors that are members of our wine club. So they are ambassadors of our brand. So we don't want to upset our community and people that feel that we're part of the community by doing things that upset them as well. So things like serving alcohol beyond, or serving in the courtyard beyond sundown. We're not doing that. It's against the rules. It's also not safe. So, it's basically just sort of constant training and reassessing and reevaluating and hammering these points home, which with any business you basically have to do all the time. So, and this is Cameron Shaw, and she can attest to this. She manages the entire property. And tight ship? Yep, tight ship. Thank you. So, does that kind of cover it? I mean,
that was excellent.
Okay.
I'm going to have you come every time one of these applications come.
No problem.
And say the same thing. So thank you very much. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Sure.
Any other questions of the applicant? Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight, Mr.
Sure.
Stewart. So, have you seen an increase in your tasting room business since Southside has opened?
It's too soon
I know
to
it's
tell.
we had the fire, and then we had, and I can't really remember when they opened.
So what we actually see at this point is a lot of, morning breakfast and then lunchtime for locals that live here in town and in Napa who might be also commuting way up and down the valley. So we're seeing local traffic to the tasting room, but we're not seeing like a huge increase in tourism, which I think is just sort of, an aspect of it being January, February, right? So we're hoping that picks up, right? But I meet a lot of people in the courtyard because I'm up here more often, and most of them are coming in because they're hungry and they like the food, and we sit and we hang out and we talk, and then I get to tell them about the winery. So we're still kind of a small brand, and I think that Southside is, building our brand and our reputation, and then once they have the wines, the quality is there. But I haven't seen any elements of free-for-all. Which I think would be the big concern, right? Like, we're concerned about parking, we're concerned about, noise and safety and all that kind of stuff. And I haven't seen anything that would make me think that pouring at the table for one of these guests would create a negative atmosphere.
And so, just to be clear, what
Yes.
you are hoping to gain from this tonight, should it
Yes.
pass, is you can do a full tasting service outside from when you open until dusk.
Yeah, within the hours of operation.
Right. Well,
It-
you're
it-
open till 10 inside, so just
Correct,
until
yeah, no, the
dusk
courtyards
outside,
are
right?
off limits.
Dark. I
during-
think it
Yeah,
says
exactly.
dark, dusk.
Exactly. So nothing about the interior aspects of our business would change. In terms of the courtyards, the only change I want to make is that I don't want people to have to get up and go inside anymore for change tastings. I would like to be able to approach them and pour their next tasting. And if they want to know more about it, be able to tell them. But if they want to be left alone, I can also do that. And just really have a seamless experience for our, guests and residents.
And you cannot pour by the glass, is that correct?
That is correct. That is pretty, that's illegal for our
That's what I
business.
thought,
And
your
also, I think
license.
your zoning doesn't allow that on our side of the street.
And in your, during the high months?
Yes.
How much are your 50 seats used? Are there 30 people in the chairs and sofas? Or?
It kind of depends.
Just a ballpark.
Yeah, well, I mean, we haven't had like a Gather Cafe was closed during a high season.
Right.
So, and then when we opened the Gather in high season, we hadn't ramped up any business. So I don't have any historical data for this. But from what I'm seeing of the guests that actually come and eat at Southside, a lot of them aren't ordering wine. Like they're just there to have lunch, So I think it might change once we hit tourist season, but there's a limit to how many people we can sit out there, and we're already there. So this is kind of a long way of saying I don't know, but I'm trying to just reassure you as much as possible that we had the best of intentions.
No, I hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those are my questions. Thank
Sure,
you.
Absolutely.
I think that's it for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other members of the public like to speak? Tracy, come on up.
Tracy McCardle, General Manager for Handwritten Wines and Jessup Cellars. I just wanted to say that I want to thank the council for allowing these specific tasting rooms to venture down this path. High levels of customer service and experience are extremely important to the long-term sustainability of our businesses, so we sincerely appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Pam Reeves, 6887 Jefferson. I just want to say, as a resident of northern Yountville, I would say that I really appreciate the fact that Stuart Cellars went the distance to bring in a local serving restaurant, and the fact that the council approved a project that includes outdoor seating. It seems odd to me that we restrict the actual use of that outdoor seating. So I would encourage the council to allow this because it just makes sense. And I see the quizzical looks on people's face thinking, what the heck? Why is this not the wine region, and why can I not get service outside? It's like all the other outdoor areas that look like you should be able to get service, and you can't. That just doesn't make sense to me. Once we approve a project and approve those seats outside, it should be just part of the application. That being said, I have to say I don't agree with the idea that we're so flexible with parking, but since that's the law, I think that this is a good application.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no others, I'll close the public hearing and invite discussion by council. Councilmember Dorman, would you like to begin?
Thank you. So, excuse me. Like I said, I think this is an interesting case because they're asking to basically have 50% of the parking they would otherwise need, maybe 40%, maybe 60% of the parking they would otherwise need. Our ordinance is geared to tasting rooms, yet this also captures a restaurant. and puts the two together to make yet a sort of third entity. I think it's great that Stewart should be able to serve outside. I am wondering, though, let's say that because of the synergistic effect, which is what I think both entities hope for, the restaurant Southside has to add employees. So I would suggest as some sort of compromise that Southside also make a commitment that it will not have to add employees, because I think once word gets out that you can have a meal at a reasonable price and you can have a great tasting at a reasonable price, I think people will frequent it to put the two together. So I could be in favor of it if we have the resolution until we correct the language in the resolution to say outside until dark, and that Southside also gives us the employee commitment. And then the other piece of this is, I don't see any need to reference Resolution 17-466, which is the generic resolution talking about council can increase or decrease parking, because the whole purpose of the resolution under which we're proceeding is to be able to do that as a standalone. So I think to conflate the two will just bring up problems in the future, because we don't really even, 17-466 would be, I think, if Stewart had come to us and they weren't already having outside use. Then they come to us and they say, now we want to have outside use, but we don't want to have to double our parking commitment. So I would like to keep the two separate. I think that's the way to go. I think to put them together only confuses, because one does not rise and fall with the other. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Councilor Durham? Want me to come back to you?
No, I'm fine. We want to allow outside service, but we have to be flexible on parking based on our past actions. So therefore, we've made these findings to base our decision moving forward to allow it. I mean, and what I might venture to say too is someone's going to park across the street, go to Girard, and then walk across the street and eat at Southside and have wine at with wine at Stewart Cellars. Is it only the employees we're worried about, or the guests as well? It's mostly employees. But even if
the concern is both. But the idea is that guests are already using the outdoors. The question is whether additional employees are needed to service it. But you've raised an important point, that we think that by bringing this outside activity and people seeing pedestrians, they themselves become pedestrians, and they may go to different businesses. That's just part of the nature of having an active streetscape and having that level of interest. So that is another reason that helps support what we've presented to you, and why we are hopeful there's not going to be a parking impact because of each of those conditions.
How many employees does Southside have on one shift?
We don't know, because we're working with them right now on their employee parking management plan and designating spaces for those employees. So it's an active effort.
And they're open 8 to 3?
Yes. However, under their use permit, they too could be open till 10 if they wanted.
Very good. So, given the findings that Nathan has discussed, and just with the one change that I'd like to see under the in the resolution, based on those findings, I'm fine with moving forward with this. So,
Councilmember Mueller?
I'm absolutely fine with this too. I think, we really discuss, well, first of all, I think we do need to be more creative in this town about parking. We've kind of held certain standards. We really haven't gone outside and really looked to see if something else is going to work. We've always assumed this is how it has to be. So at our, how many months ago, we actually talked about combining FAR and open space. So the way I see it is we have the tables for the wine tasting and the seats, and we have the table for the restaurant. These are now going to be, just because somebody is now having wine and a sandwich, it's the same people. So it just makes abundance of sense to me. Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, for having good wine and good food, and I think you're going to be the showcase out there for how it can be done well. So I don't see an additional need for parking based on these combined activities. I think it's all going to work quite well. So I'm very excited about finally doing this. I think, that the reason it has taken a while is because we had a plethora of wine tasting rooms really kind of open, quite a few within, maybe a 5 or 6 year period here in town, and we had to kind of get used to how this was all going to work. We saw some of the problems. We had to pull stuff back. I think Yountville I think it's time. So I'm very excited that we're going to do that, and you're going to be first one out of the gate to lead the example for everybody else. So thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Well, I concur. I'm delighted. I've long said that I wanted to see a more vibrant streetscape. You have such a beautiful property. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping the heritage oak tree. And, I think that any of the parking and et cetera will be looked at the annual permit meeting, because you share the permit with the Southside Cafe as well. So I have a feeling that those things will shake out over time, but I'm in complete support. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. And this is easy. This is a yes. We have, and we've talked about this when we first came up with this ordinance idea. We should be giving you the opportunity, every business, that we're asking for a high level of customer service to deliver it, and not to handcuff you from being able to deliver that. And we're acknowledging that and seeing that you, as far as I'm concerned, you meet all the conditions and findings necessary here. I'm not worried about the parking. Thankfully, we residents know that there's parking back there. A lot of folks go elsewhere to find their parking. Let them do that. And it is awkward. I've had lunch. I won't say breakfast, but I've had lunch there. And I've had breakfast, but not to go get wine tasting while having the breakfast. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it's an awkward experience to get up and go get a 2-ounce pour or 1.5 ounces or whatever it is and come back to your table. That's not the way we do business in Yountville. I don't think we should anyway. I don't see any negative impact in doing this. You have the employees already. You have the seats already. I'm completely comfortable with sharing of the two businesses. They enhance each other, in my opinion. I do think it's going to be a very vibrant space as the warm weather continues going forward. So, like I said, it's easy for me to support this, and I look forward actually to seeing you execute on this, having a real-time live example of how it works and how it should work, and then we can take the next steps with some of the other applicants that we had in this chambers just a couple months ago. So totally support it. I think we can all comfortably agree that the outside till dark as opposed to the 10 p.m. correction, it's not a change in my opinion, it's a correction of the finding. I think it's basically a clerical change.
Yeah, that was a typo in the staff report itself. It's not.
The resolution's
That's
correct.
not in the resolution or the
Okay,
findings.
even better. So with that, is there a motion to be presented by the council on this application?
I'd like to make a motion, but I don't have my screen up. Hold on. So I'd like to move approving a use permit amendment for Stewart Cellars, 6752 Washington Street, APN 036-033-014, to permit wine tasting service in the courtyard space with the following changes to the proposed resolution. One being, if it does say until 10 p.m., that be changed to dark to comport with the use permit. I think it picked up a part of the narrative or somewhere, I think, but I could be misremembering. And the other being to take out the reference to resolution number 17-466. Which is the separate ordinance regarding discretion for tasting rooms that are not in this program.
Before I ask for a second, I'll ask Gary, is there a specific reason that language is referenced there? Is there a concern in your mind of removing it?
Point me again to the language that's being discussed, sorry.
Do you have exactly where it's located, Councilmember Dorman?
Yes, it's
Recital number 1.
A of the resolution, proposed resolution.
So my understanding is that, and staff feel free to correct, the first recital A references the ordinance, which is codified in the municipal code, which allows a modification of the parking requirements pursuant to an advisory checklist. The second recital B is a resolution which actually adopts those advisory checklists that were proposed by the planning director. And so that sort of shows the authority step by step for getting to where we are, which is to say municipal code allows this, checklist was adopted, therefore we're considering those findings. That's my understanding of the flow there.
So are you saying that resolution number 17, dash 3447 on its own would not allow us? I thought the whole purpose of 17.3447 was to say you can come to us if you're already using your outdoor space, and if you say no more employees, we can forego any additional parking burden. I thought all of that was contained in 17.3447. Is it not?
It's not. To get to that resolution, because the municipal code says there's a X number of parking spaces required for particular uses, and there was previously no way in the municipal code to vary from those parking requirements. So when a use came before the council, which required a use permit, it was which use are we fitting into and what are the parking requirements required. What recital A it references is the ordinance which allowed the council to deviate from those pursuant to a checklist and a use permit amendment.
Okay, so those two will always have to go together.
Well, the decision of whether or not to include a particular recital, it depends on who's drafting it, I suppose.
The logic would carry over, I think.
But you're saying if we do not include A in this resolution, then we cannot do what we are proposing to do tonight.
No, I'm not saying that. Particular recitals are not, no. You could remove actually more recitals if you'd like.
Okay, then I'm going to stand on my motion because I feel that the two resolutions are separate. And if I get a second, I do, and if I don't, I don't.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion that is proposed?
I will second the motion that's proposed.
Can I make a substitute motion?
Yes, you may.
I'd like to make a substitute motion that we approve Resolution 18-3454, approving a use permit amendment for Stuart Seller, 6752 Washington Street, assessor parcel number 036-033-014, to permit wine tasting services in the courtyard space. The reason I want to leave that information in, because we also, all this, in my opinion, is linked to our ordinance about parking, and also we've specifically identified wine tasting rooms that fall within this provision. So to have that linked, I mean, 5-6 years from now, it's nice to know what we've said we're going to allow. So
Would you?
I think it adds clarity without hurting anything.
Okay. Would you include that if there is any remaining reference to 10 p.m. that it would be outside till dark?
I would agree to that stipulation.
Okay,
yes.
so there is a substitute motion that has been presented. Is there a second for the substitute motion? I will second the substitute motion. So is there any further discussion on the substitute motion? If not, then please go ahead and...
And I'd just like
Yes.
to say one thing. Oh, sorry. On 3447, 13447, I don't have my numbers up in front of me, it references 17-466. So it's already in there. I mean, our underlying ordinance already has the cross-reference in it. So I just think a lot of times we have too many resolutions and we get too many things going in one way. And as Councilmember Moeller said, in 5 years, we may be here, we may not. Somebody else is going to say, oh, they went on the record and they said these have to go together. You know, I just think we get down to it, we should pair it off. That's my spiel.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the substitute motion? Seeing none, please vote on the substitute motion. That passes unanimously. Thank you. So the initial motion dies, and you have your amendment. So congratulations. No pressure, but you have to be good stewards of this new ordinance.
No pun intended.
Tracy's stewards of this motion. And Tracy's watching closely, so watch out. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to move ahead to our first administrative regular item, 10A, tree removal request. I believe Curtis is stepping forward.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight is a resolution to authorize the removal of one 12-inch diameter at breast height Coast live oak located at 4 Grant Lane. I would like to clarify for the record that the application is coming from resident John Dunbar, not Mayor John Dunbar.
Hi, John.
How are you? It's a first.
Yeah, right. Go ahead. Thank you for the clarification.
Of course. The resident at 4 Grant Lane submitted the application for a tree removal permit going through the formal process, and they have also included an attached arborist report, which you have all received as part of your staff report. Also attached is a letter from the adjacent neighbor at 2940 Lincoln Avenue in support of this tree's removal. Before we discuss the rest of the staff report and staff analysis, if you could direct your attention to the TV screens. This is the tree up for discussion this evening. To the right at the eastern elevation, that is 4 Grant Lane. To the left with the blue siding, that is 2940 Lincoln Avenue. And just to give you a better idea of the tree, we have this photo here. And this one here. This is the southern elevation of 4 Grant Lane. As you can see in the highlighted red circle, that is the oak tree up for discussion this evening. Other aspects of the property include a nice drought-tolerant landscape scheme. We have an olive tree, maple tree, other drought-tolerant shrubs. Directly to the south of the tree up for discussion this evening, there are 3 existing oak trees already between both properties. Before we get into more analysis, I'd like to clarify a few aspects of the arborist report. The report reads as follows. This is a 12-inch diameter at breast height Coast live oak located on the west side of your house, and it is approximately 25 years old. This is a poor location for this tree species. It will outgrow its allotted space, and its roots and trunk will impact the stone wall and patio hardscape. Other aspects of this arborist report do get into detail about leaving the remaining lateral branch of the oak tree. Leaving this branch makes the tree in its entirety subject to failure. After reviewing criteria in town code, staff is of the opinion that the removal of this tree is appropriate based on both code findings and arborist report findings for the following reasons. The first reason, the tree is too large of a species in general for that location. It's just very congested and heavily wooded with other oak trees. The second being, the removal of the tree will encourage growth of the other 3 oak trees to the south. And third, prior removal of the lateral limb puts the tree at great risk of failure in the future, and the arborist report states that no amount of pruning can fix the misshaped tree. According to the Town of Yountville Municipal Code, the planning officer may condition any tree removal permit or tree removal in general with a replacement tree. Staff is inclined to agree with the arborist recommendation that a valley oak be planted in its place. After speaking with both the arborist and the applicant, staff also is open to the option that an in lieu fee be paid. Looking at the town's master fee schedule, the in lieu fee would amount to $289. Though usually when we receive applications like this and a tree is proposed to be removed, we do generally like to see that the replacement tree is planted on site. That said, if you direct your attention to this photo, the tree being proposed for removal is within this circle. As you can see, both to the northern elevation of 4 Grant Lane and the southern elevation of 4 Grant Lane, it's very heavily wooded. If you do allow an in lieu fee option, the urban forest would still be protected and maintained. With this, we're here to listen to council discussion and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Very good report. Appreciate that. Questions of the staff report? Yeah, Vice Mayor.
I'm not sure whether you can answer this, Curtis, but since the arborist suggested that a valley oak be, how big do they get? I mean, aren't they a big tree as well?
Valley oaks are, and Sandra might have a little bit more knowledge, but substantially larger, and they grow a lot taller. Do you have any other?
I would just share that the form of a valley oak is a very horizontal canopy, which needs a lot of room, which is why it's a poor candidate. The valley oak that you see to the left here, it is a more vertical tree, so it could fit in a more confined space. However, those do get very large, and there are at least 5 other oaks in the immediate location, which is why we're open to the in lieu fee, which would allow an oak to be planted somewhere on town property or along the creek bed or somewhere else. Thank you.
Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. So the tree is about 25 years old?
Correct.
And maybe I missed it, but about what is an expected lifespan of this kind of tree?
Expected lifespan of a tree of this, I will as well.
yeah.
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
In the hundreds?
potentially.
This is
So-
a very young tree in terms of an oak.
It is a fairly young tree, and competing with the rest of the trees on site for soil nutrients and light, that's kind of why it grew in this particular misshaped fashion.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I invite the applicant to come up. If you have anything to, you don't have to, but if there's anything to add,
Well,
you've come all this way,
I have come all this way.
and I just want to hear it. Please identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm John Dunbar, not the mayor of Yountville. First, I just want to say, I've, been here 30 years, haven't ever really had to deal with town staff, and you guys have been great. So, I mean, professional, courteous, get back to you, have questions, so you don't have to, the real thing was, so you don't have to come and then come back and then answer more questions, then answer more questions. So even though it's been a October, November, December, January, like a 5-month process since I think I first put the paperwork in, everyone's been very nice to work with. So, this just, as you can kind of tell, it's a misshapen tree in a bad spot, and it sits on my neighbor's roof for the most part, which is why she actually was the one that kind of started the process, was like, hey, if I take this all off my roof, we're going to be left with this kind of stump thing. And so I said, okay, I'll see, taking it down. And then we found out that because of the type of tree, it has to get voted on, et cetera, et cetera. So, if I don't really have too much more to add, it's not a, in the back behind it, although you can't really see from this picture, there's a really big, old, beautiful oak tree that has to be right back in the corner that backs up to the cemetery. So there's a lot of trees right through that phase. And I don't really want to put another one right in that same spot, which is why it'd be nice if you could plant maybe a nicer tree, somewhere else. There's still tons of trees on the property. And that's it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions of the applicant?
Oh, Southside Cafe is great. As a local living in the north part,
Yeah,
nice to have breakfast.
I don't see any questions. Anyone else like to speak to this issue? Seeing no one else, I'll invite council discussion or action. Any conversation, or is there a motion to be offered? Councilmember Mueller,
Ready to make a motion if
go ahead.
nobody wants to talk. My laptop just timed out. Give me 1 second. All right. I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number 18-3455, authorizing the removal of one 12-inch DBH coastal live oak at 4 Grant Lane.
Is there a second to that?
We do need you to add direction on either the on-site replacement or the in lieu fee.
Oh,
I was going to wait and see until we had a second or not, but if you'd like to address that in your motion.
And I recommend that an in lieu fee is adequate.
In the recitals of the resolution, it does specify that an in lieu fee of $289 would be charged to the applicant. So it's not in the title, but it is reflected in the recitals and will be part of the
So
action.
my motion stands as previously made.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
All right. The motion and a second. Please vote.
Oh, jeez. I have to push my button. It's my button.
And that passes unanimously. So it took you a little while to get here, but it didn't take you very long to get the approval. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
You showed up and hooked my meter back up yet.
You can stay for the budget parameters.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move right ahead to our next item, fiscal year 18-19 budget parameters and key assumptions. We're going to move some people around here. Maria's back. Curtis, thank you very much. Very good staff report.
It was the best tree one so far, actually.
Do not have a presentation for you, but this is part of our annual routine. We've started our fiscal year budget process with the departments, and the purpose of our conversation today is to ensure that we agree on the proposed public workshop meetings for the budget, which are outlined in the report, and then go over some of the key parameters that we set up for the budget for projecting revenues and inform you of some things that we're going to be doing this year. I'm going to keep it short. If you want me to elaborate on any of the sections, I can do that. Feel free to just let me know. So for purposes of this discussion, we're proposing that we meet for our budget workshop to go over the different department budgets on May 8th, 9:30 to 12, and May 22nd, 1 to 3:30. And with regard to the budget parameters in your report with the lengthy attachment, wanted to just remind you and the public that we try to set a baseline budget, keeping everything pretty stable. We've got a really nice process here for setting up our budget with honoring our reserve policies and trying to fund all of those, sometimes higher when we can, meeting our OPEB contribution, making sure we pay all of our PERS and pension liabilities, and setting aside funds for capital projects. So generally, there's three areas where we really focus for revenues, and that includes transient occupancy tax, sales tax, and property tax, because they make up a large portion of our general fund revenue. So we try to pay attention to those and set some conservative estimates so that we can balance our budget. We also make sure that we meet reserves. Like I said, we've got a general fund emergency reserve of 20% of general fund expenditures, and the revenue stabilization reserve, which is usually set at 15% of TOT. In prior years, we've been able to exceed that a bit, and we always strive to do that where we can. So the really good news is that if we were to look at our fund balances overall, including our trust funds, which we've not technically included as part of the pie chart in your packet this year, but this time we did, we've got $10.4 million, including our pension rate stabilization fund and the OPEB trust and all of our different contingency and reserves, which is really good because usually our expenses are about that much. So that's just set aside for our stability. That's something that Yountville can be really proud of. In terms of what we're trying to set up for fiscal year 18-19, we're going to talk about transient occupancy tax first. I'm proposing that we set transient occupancy tax revenues at $6.8 million. This is moderately conservative. It's pretty much based on the 3-year average. We know that this year is kind of a different year because of the fires, because of some properties being remodeled. Our budget for this year is set at a little bit over $6.5 million. But the year prior, we had a stellar year at 7.1. So I think it's a pretty good estimate to get us to 6.8 for the following year, hoping that all the properties are online and everything's back to normal and everyone knows that Napa Valley is alive and well. And I think that's a good start.
Maria, well, just if I could, you all can be following in there, but it might be helpful if you have questions as we're on a topic, if you would let us know so
Sure.
we don't get further into something.
Yeah,
That
I was
way
just
if
assuming we were just fine and moving right along.
Well,
All
We
right.
will go as under that assumption, but
Okay.
if you do have something, let us know.
And Councilmember Durham, there you go.
Well, it's TOT. So you're projecting at 300,000 less in the next year?
No, I'm proposing, so this year's revenue target in 17-18 is 6.5 million, so I'm bumping it up 300,000 more.
It says
6.8.
2016, 2017 was a very strong year with 7.1 in TOT
That's
revenue.
actual money as opposed to
Yes.
budgeted.
So in
That's my point.
Sorry.
That was actual.
Oh, yes, lower than 7.1. Yes, and so the reason that I'm doing that is because we're following a 3-year average, and so this helps us stay conservative. I know 7.1 would be super fun, and so I get excited about good high revenues too. But if you look at the next page where you look at the growth, and this is where I will echo Steve, in the rate of growth that we're achieving, in 15 it was 5.1%, in 16 it was 3.44%, and in 17 it was 5%. So keeping things really nice and steady. One of the things that's really dangerous about this is that if we experience a big shortfall, it's really hard to come back and adjust the budget. And so it's sometimes better to just be a little bit more conservative. We can always adjust up if things are trending really good, but it's much more difficult for the organization to adjust down.
We do have the uncertainty of two of our largest hotel properties. One's back online, the other isn't, and then there's the assumption that the improved business will continue, but we haven't seen the busiest time of the year yet to know if it's really
Correct.
recovered.
Yeah.
So and you and I have talked about this, I just want to go on public record as saying we have means to research this and not just take the last 3 years' average. And we have 2 REITs in town who have invested heavily in this town. So that changes the future look as well. And we have the resources out there to be even tighter. So that's my, and be able to put a footnote in there saying this national research firm has stated this, this, and this. So that's just where I'm coming from.
I hear you, Councilmember Durham, on that, and I think we need to look at how we do use a conservative rolling average only because of our extreme dependence. Because, and we'll always tell you we're going to be conservative, and that is also part of the reason we have the opportunity to look at unassigned fund balance at year end. From a budgeting perspective, because we are so dependent on this one single revenue stream, if we increase this by 400,000 or 500,000 and we don't make it, that's where we're coming from a conservative staff perspective, because if you go in and plan other expenditures based on the assumption the 400,000 is going to be generated and it doesn't, then we have a very different challenge that you as a council fortunately have not had to deal with that some communities do, which is what mid-year corrections or restructuring. So no disagreement with you. We actually follow and have been reading some of the STR, but again, we use it for a slightly different purpose than the industry. So I think what we're trying to do is reflect that. I will footnote, we've had a lot of conversations. I've had anecdotal conversations with the managers. This is a very interesting time period for us. No disagreement that we're seeing some major investment, but I also haven't seen, I don't know where the results are yet. And that's why it makes it really hard for us to be a little bit more aggressive. I will be able to be more comfortable, and we may look at a mid-year adjustment when we start seeing both properties online. Because for this particular year, and I'll call it abnormal, we have the fire, but I also have the concern of what happens if Villaggio takes 2 months longer to reopen, because Villaggio is 112 rooms of our 450. Now, the good news is they were very strategic and worked with us, and they're taking them off during the slow season, and it's helping to impact on the balance. But as we go into March, April, and May, if they're not back online, we could start having a different scenario. So I think we'll continue to look at that, and I just want you to know we are conservative by nature, and we acknowledge that.
Well, what I'm going to follow up with Councilmember Durham is saying, I'm not hearing him say to adjust the budget projection. I'm hearing him say you have another tool that you can use to validate your budget projection, and what's the harm in using that additional tool? That's what I'm hearing. And so maybe between now and when we have the budget meetings, if it makes sense to use that additional information to validate what you're presenting, what's the harm in that? I don't know if there's a fee involved or not.
The fee is pretty small.
So
it's
that
not-
is something for you to consider, and you've heard a couple council members interested, but yeah.
There isn't a problem in reporting that information in any way. It's really more a philosophy of the risk. So this bar chart where I show the 13% bump in 2013, and then we dropped to 10, and then we dropped to 5, is starting to tell us a story about the possibility that our revenue growth is narrowing. And if it does, that's where for in trying to be prudent and trying to just be really fiscally conservative, that's where we are. But absolutely fair to report.
Totally get it. I'm not saying change your aggressive or conservative stance, but validate the position with whatever means we have that are available to us.
Just for full background, I also think next year we will have a slightly different environment because we, in theory, have 5 new rooms coming on with the restructuring of the Bellagio, and if everything goes forward with the Bardesano, 3 additional. Now, I only mention that because then, Councilmember Durham, I now have a capacity change that could also factor in. So we're monitoring that and working with that and trying to figure out what the new room rate reality, because as you were alluding to, the Vintage House opened up at a different rate structure than the Vintage Inn, and the expectation is that the Bellagio rebranded will also open up at a different price point. Now, we don't have history to determine if that's appropriately successful or if that has any impact on other hotel performance. So, but I do think we acknowledge, and we certainly can go ahead and get the STR stuff information, but just kind of want you to know how we're monitoring this, because as you know, it's 65% of our revenue stream generated by a very small base.
Okay. If no other questions, Maria?
Yep. So for sales tax, we're proposing almost $1.3 million, $1,290,000, including the public safety allocation, which is trended at about $20,000. Sales tax has taken a bit of a dip, and we've talked about this in the past. We know that the French Laundry closed for lunch. We know that we lost Pacific Blues, as you summarized earlier today. And so we're also seeing this kind of interesting dip for 2017. And so we're hoping to see that recovery, but also being conservative. So we're basing the revenue based on 16-17 actual, so that we're nice and steady. The last 3 years have been closer to 1.3. But the 5 years has been closer to 1.27, so we went 1.29, thinking that's pretty reasonable. Moving on to assessed valuation. This is also excellent news for the town. We have increased by 20.69%. That's great. We've gone to a total AV report of $863 million, with an increase of $148 million over the prior year. So that's awesome. We've almost doubled our valuation in the last 10 years. So really great news. We all know that this is tied to the commercial property sales, and they don't turn over often, but then this sets a new base for us, which is great. And just kind of wanted you to see that in terms of what AV is doing, because AV is tied to our property tax. So property tax, we're proposing $1,373,000 based on 2017 with a 2% growth factor. And then for the other pieces of property tax that feed it, which is unsecured, VLF, and transfer tax, which are different, they grow differently, they're paid differently, they occur at different times, and they're smaller. We used a 3-year average. So that's what we're proposing there. The graph that you have shows the proportionate pieces that feed into this total property tax revenue. So the secured is the most steady. Then you've got the unsecured, which comes in when a property turns over, as well as the real property transfer tax line, which is the purple line that you see move up and down depending on when things transfer. and then the VLF, which comes from the state. So for the state's COPS grant, we've steadily always received about $110,000, so that's a pretty safe amount. We're proposing the same one. We are really hoping to keep this as a good baseline budget with no major surprises. We'll be watching things carefully and adjusting as we need to. These are some of the things that we do know right now. We've got the animal shelter placeholder of about $330,000, an increase of $4,000 from this current year. Napa Housing Authority contract, which we have in place, it's a 2-year agreement and expires this year, but right now we're expecting it to be $35,000. We've been in contact with them, and we think that's a good placeholder. Public safety, we're served by both, obviously, Napa County, CAL FIRE, and the Sheriff's Department. We've got ongoing costs for service rising to be over $1.8 million in 18-19, definitely $2 million by 19-20. And something that we talk about often here, it's 40% more than our current property taxes. So public safety costs are going up.
Yeah, Vice Mayor, question.
Well, I noticed when I was reading that CAL FIRE does not have a contract and hasn't had one since 2014.
Yes.
Do you know what that's all about?
So I'll let Steve talk with you about that.
Actually, Vice Mayor Dornbecker, we have the contract is with the county. And the issue happened back under a prior administrator where the Veterans Home would not enter into the restructuring. We have a multi-party station operation. All 3 parties share in the agreement. The actual contract says all that. When we renew the agreement, what we generally update is maximum based on current payroll estimates. There's what we call a provision for rollover, so the terms continue. So what it is, when I go in and look at it, the numbers don't reflect reality, which is why, if you remember in last year's budget season, I told you we were going to see a bigger bill because CAL FIRE had finally, at the state level, settled their employee contract. If you may familiar, County of Napa only has one person that they pay for, which is in their administrative, and then they contract with CAL FIRE. So when that came through, they have a pass-through provision in their master agreement. So we're seeing some one-time costs, a fairly large amount, and we're also expecting that plateau will continue a bit as the state works to recover pension and employee insurance costs. So I don't feel that you're going, I don't feel we're getting disserved by that by any stretch of the imagination, but the cost for the 2 will be very clear, in my opinion, around $2 million, and we'll have to wait and see where the county ends up in 2 or 3 years with PERS liability for both the sheriffs and then under CAL FIRE. But right now we'll be going into year 2 of a firm dollar amount with the Sheriff Department. Year 3, if you recall, it's in there, we get over $1 million alone on the sheriff. So that's just, for us, that's a significant financial obligation.
Thank you.
So just to wrap that portion up, for fire and emergency medical services, kind of a prelude to what's coming in the future for this year, we're going to adjust the budget for this year because we've gotten the adjusted bill and we need to do the budget adjustment for this year, and that'll be at a separate meeting. But for 18-19, we're proposing about $870,000 just to cover those costs, and we know that those costs are going to continue to rise, so we can expect to hit the $1 million mark after 2019, not sooner. And I just gave you a graphed picture because I like to do pictures so that you could see sort of the costs of fire and emergency services. Speaking to what Steve already covered related to public safety, law enforcement services, we expect that we're going to be paying $989,000 for 18-19. It's about $40,000 more than the current year, and this is the second year of the current 3-year agreement, so we'll have one more year on that agreement. And again, a graph of just the costs and what we're looking at here in the last 5 years. So PERS retirement, I was at a meeting earlier today on PERS costs and the differing opinions from different experts in the field about PERS, but we know one thing is true, PERS rates are going up for local governments, and the discount rate, which is what causes our rates to go up, is going down. So we know that it's going to be less than 7% after June of 2018 or so, but we're watching it. The good news for the town is this. We've got about 47% of our workforce in the classic tier, which is the more costly tier. We've got 16, almost 17% in tier 2 and almost 37% in tier 3. So over time, I think we're addressing the problem of pension costs nicely with the way that we're holding the line with FTEs and the way in which we've been able to hire. So it's an issue we're working on. The other good news is that we've been able to keep up with our basic payment and our unfunded actuarially accrued liability, and we also set up a pension rate stabilization fund. So those are all steps in the right direction, and we'll continue to keep talking about that as this situation unfolds. And this is just a table summarizing the rate of the employer normal cost, which is a percentage of payroll, and then on top of that, that unfunded gap, but that looks back on the market and says, oh, we didn't perform and therefore now you owe us a little more. Those are the amounts that PERS has said we expect to pay based on a 7.5% discount rate. So now we know those amounts are probably going to move a little more because the discount rate's going down. But this is moving information, just giving it to you as close to real time as I possibly can. So employee health insurance rates, pardon my typo there in that last sentence of the first paragraph. It should read, health rates can be volatile and difficult to project. We're currently projecting a 9% increase for 18-19. So we're going to just raise rates for health care by 9%. We usually get them later, so it's difficult to know what they're going to be, but we try to look at the last 5 years and blend it and then bump it a little so that we have the money available to cover the rates and not have any major changes over time. So negotiated bargaining units. Labor negotiations with 2 of the units have started. So the current agreements expire in June of this year. And so what I can share is that local agencies in the area have entered into multi-year contracts that are ranging between 2 and 3.5% CPI. The CPI we monitor, and we usually get that from the first quarter of the calendar year. And so we're trying to set some parameters around that range as long as you're in agreement so that we can prepare for negotiations and also plan for the budget. With regard to risk management expenses, this is also one of those rates that we sort of look at, and we're partner agencies with other JPAs, but we're expecting PARSAC premiums to go up at about 10%, so we'll be monitoring them but budgeting for that. That concludes generally the big ticket items. I want to just briefly summarize the key assumptions that we were setting to set up our budget. So basically, keep existing service levels, evaluating our cost and our cost recovery where possible. As you know, we always come to you and update the master fee schedule and share with you where our fees are going based on CPI and look for things where we can cost recover appropriately. So that'll also happen as part of our budget process. We're going to be committed to keeping the budget balanced, revenues within expenditures, nothing more, nothing less. And then we'll also honor all of our reserve targets and our contingency, for example, of $240,000. We do think that we'll have $100,000 still related to the Envision Yountville General Plan update, which is not complete yet and will probably go on into the next year. Probably about $15,000 for the election costs, and as you know, we'll also be dealing with the GAN limit at that time. We want to continue to fund our OPEB rate, and right now we don't have an updated actuary report, but as of the latest one, we'll still continue to propose 14.5% of payroll. Again, good news for Yountville. We've been really good at putting funds aside when there's been an unassigned fund balance, and so the trust is now over $2.8 million just for the retiree medical costs, so that's great. Water and wastewater funds, this is not unfamiliar to you. We finished the rate study. We're waiting for the rate study to conclude, or the rates to get concluded, so that we can set the budget based on whatever the council decides.
On that note, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So I understand that under new undertakings, we have explore opportunities to leverage the return on the investment of the balance of the drought reserve fund. in doing that, and to help augment the water enterprise funds. So is that something that could be applied to rate reduction?
You mean the interest earnings of the fund? That's totally up for council discussion. I don't see why you couldn't. It's part of the enterprise.
Thank you.
The only caution I would have right now is I think we would need to have an understanding of what that would be and the amount of earnings you're talking, because even if we were to get 5 or 6% an annual basis on $2 million, it's not going to have a significant impact on rate. And you would also need to reevaluate your drought reserve fund policy. But in answer, in theory, yes, it could be.
Thank you.
So we'll continue to maintain funding for the Yountville trolley service 7 days a week, and we'll look at continue to do what we do with the library and the hours that we cover in addition to what they cover. So none of that is expected to change unless something comes up through the budget process. And then we'll continue our maintenance of effort approaches with all the different revenues that we have. We've got gas tax, of course, and we're very excited about SB1 and Measure T and what those will bring on the horizon.
Before we get away from the trolley service, we're expecting a new vehicle this year. I don't know that our contribution is going to be notably impacted, but I don't think we're responsible for any maintenance costs now, are we?
Here's what I know.
Because those should go down.
Well, here's what I would say.
That's a good point.
We don't pay, we pay what is known as fare box recovery.
Understood.
So we pay a portion that the customer would normally pay. And you all know that we are the only Napa city that provides free service. Calistoga, St. Helena, there's actually you have to pay a charge. So we pay that. I have no reason right now to believe that the change in potential vehicle is going to change the fare box recovery target. That is something that we'll reach out to confirm. There have been some early discussions that if Yountville wants something different than what NVTA may be proposing on how the new vehicle is outfitted, that may be on us, but that's a conversation we haven't had and we don't know.
Well, the conversation that's been had at NVTA so far is that the Up Valley jurisdictions with their own trolley or shuttle services would be, they would be, I don't want to say decorating, they would be branding the vehicles for the individual jurisdictions. So
Correct.
We would have feedback on what that means.
Correct.
I'm just talking about the costs associated. So it sounds like we're not worried about it, at least not at this point. So that's great. So new undertakings?
Mm-hmm. So as Councilmember Dornbecker mentioned, we're going to try and see what we can do with the Drought Reserve Fund to see if we can grow its performance. Right now, I think the earnings were something like $5,000 since it's the fund's inception. So it's been very small, but that's because it's in a conservative fund, and I think there might be an opportunity to just grow that a tiny bit more, and that's always helpful, whether you choose to allocate it or not. It's still something good to look into, and it's on our bucket list, and we really want to get to it this year. The other thing that we'll see happening is that the finance department is going to transition to a lockbox service for utility payment processing. What does that really mean? That really means that payments that come into the front office right now and are manually processed are going to go to a processing center. It's actually a completely free service we get from our bank. So it saves us time and money, and it reduces errors. And we're also going to do a remote capture service to process payments that are made by handwritten check faster and again reduce data entry errors. And so there's actually no cost to this, but sometimes it's good to outline the no cost because you get a better service to the organization. So now staff time can be devoted to other higher level projects, which will be a good thing. And then the other really exciting thing that we do every year in line with this, but it's going to be next time, is our CIP update. And our Public Works Director and staff will be providing an update at the February 20th council meeting to brief you on what their plans are and provide you updates on our capital needs and priorities for the budget. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and also also want to confirm that you support the proposed budget workshop dates.
Thank you. Any further questions of the report?
I have
Councilor
one.
Dorman?
Thank you. So where are our various reserve policies memorialized?
They're in
as
our-
to the amount and and which reserves we have.
So they're in our budget document.
Okay.
Under town fiscal policies, and I can send you.
And
the
so
set.
are they adopted as part of the budget, the reserve policy?
Yes.
It's not a separate resolution?
No, they're.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mueller?
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up fireworks. I didn't see anything in here about fireworks. We're still continuing that, correct?
Fireworks.
Let me-
Steve.
Not every expenditure and
Correct.
revenue is.
Let me, yes. I
But
think
it's
that-
always been in our, every time we've done this high-level summary, it's always been on the list. It's not on the list this year,
We
so
have
that's why I
moved it,
asked.
here's what I will say. We've attempted to streamline key expenditures and changes. So we're continuing, for us, the fireworks is a 15 to 20,000 expenditure out of community events. We're not taking it away. The other thing I would just, while we have this, you'll actually know that the activity level is smaller in those areas. That's because, we're coming off a several-year period of significant capital projects and reinvestment, and we just simply aren't doing as many of those. We'll be finishing the general plan process, was a significant effort over 3 years that we saved money up for. So this is sort of a little bit of a mellow period, and we go back into a planning update process. Our big question mark, obviously, will be where and what we do with the rate structure and how it affects the potential utility enterprise funds operations. But what we're really seeing, what we're looking at is basically a continuation and maintenance of the current service levels and functions and activities. Obviously, we want to hear from you if there are some things that you want changed or something you don't want us to consider doing. But for the most part, that's the strategy we're looking at. And our early indications are that the, revenue stream should be sufficient for us to do that. I am going to caution you that I do not think we'll continue to be bringing in the same level of unassigned fund balance, but we'll continue to be disciplined, make an allocation for our OPEB, continue our reserve funding processes, and we will start implementing the revenue streams when we fully understand SB 1 and Measure T. So there will be, we think, in, say, year 2 from here, some potential relief that we'll be able to start understanding prioritization as it relates to that funding and what level we'll be able to do on that. So it's pretty much a status quo budget.
Any other questions? Any,
Just
Vice Mayor?
a comment on the dates that we're having our workshops. I will not be in the state on May the 8th.
Okay.
Okay, before we get into that, I wanted to invite any member of the public that wanted to have a comment about this conversation. Seeing none, now we can keep talking. Okay, let's, I first want to propose that the council act on the parameters and the assumptions as presented. Is there, do you want a formal motion, Michelle? Or just direction?
Direction.
So is there direction that we can? Right, but do you actually need us to vote on this, or can we just verbally say we agree?
Yeah, there should be a consensus. It's not asking for discussion and provide direction.
Okay, so
Consensus
does the
direction.
council agree with the parameters and the key assumptions as presented?
I agree.
Is there any opposition? Yes, so we all agree with that.
Thank you.
Now, May 8th and May 22nd. There's one conflict on May 8th, it sounds like. Are there any other conflicts with either of these dates? Okay, so 5 of us can do May 22nd and 4 of us can do May 8th. Do we need to reconsider May 8th, or are we going to move forward with?
Vice Mayor, what would your availability be the week of May 8th? Is there another date that you are available?
No, not that week, but I return on the 11th. I could do the following week.
The week of the 14th.
Council, does that work for you?
What?
I have to go
What day are we
check
talking
another
about?
I have to go check my home calendar, and I don't know, because we already cleared these dates, right? That's
Yeah,
why
we
they're on
We
here.
we corresponded by email.
I'd have to go
about
back
this.
and redo. Look.
So I think we need to do this offline. We don't
I
need to
agree.
have everyone sit here and watch us look
Yep.
at our calendars. We are going to leave them as May 8th and May 22nd right now, but we may be changing the May 8th. Is that direction from council?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Okay.
there we go.
Very good. Sounds good. I'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then I believe we are on to our next item, 10C, Town Council Protocols Update. Michelle, this is yours.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you is the Town Council Protocol Update. Council first adopted protocols in March of 2006, and staff has periodically brought updates to the council since then. Our last update was in March 2014, and the update includes a variety of either new policies that council set, language for new laws that have come into effect, or changes in process internally, and then most importantly, comments that we've received from council on potential new items or items to rediscuss and further vet. Included in this staff report is obviously the staff report, is that there's also an exhibit, which is the summary of town council protocols, which shows the variety of additions, amendments, and then discussion items that will need council to discuss and provide direction. There's also a full markup red line version of the town council protocols included, and at the conclusion of council's discussion, we would ask that you provide consensus direction with the changes, and then at a future meeting, staff will bring back a resolution and another red line version of the protocols for your consideration. In addition, this is also an opportunity for council to add any items that may not have been included in the markup and the table that you'll be looking at. In terms of the discussion, I would recommend that council refer to the exhibit, which is the summary of town council protocols, and then I will be bouncing back and forth between the markup, the red line version of the protocols, and this exhibit. There are some minor typographical type changes or sentence restructuring that I didn't include in the table. So if there's something there, I'll note that. That concludes my report. Do you have any questions on the staff report?
So how is it you're proposing that we tackle this? You've got a list of quite a few
I think
proposals.
I think we should go through the exhibit itself and go in order of that. And then if you might have to bounce back and forth on the iPad between the protocols and this document, but for ease of reference, maybe the exhibit would be better.
Okay.
So the first change is an update, just really updating the language for the current strategic plan, which is 1.2. And then, do you want me to wait as we go through, or?
Well, I'm still trying to get come to grips with how you want us to handle this. You want all 5 of us to say yes or no after every single item here? Is that what we're talking about?
That might be.
I would say, Mayor and Council, we're looking for some general direction. So if you look at something and you all are generally okay, then we move on to the next one. And that there's more robust discussion, then you have that and we move on. That's probably the best way, but I don't know that each of you needs to vote. If there's some of these are pretty administrative and clerical. Some do require a little bit more input from the council.
So we're responding to one member of the public wanting better communication regarding agenda items?
Yeah, I think I can give an example. This individual, I think, had tried to get in touch with council members but hadn't heard back from them yet, and it was about a particular public hearing item. And they just asked me generically, what is the council's process for communicating with residents? And I guess I could give the best example is some council members are comfortable going out to project sites, maybe for public hearings ahead of time and meeting with the applicants, and maybe other council members prefer to wait until the item's considered at council, so they wouldn't go to sites. So that's basically what I could get from that comment. Do we need to capture a little paragraph saying, you know, what council does when communicating with the public? It's based on their preference, or?
Okay, I'll start. This is purely up to each individual council member.
Yeah, yes,
it
that's
is
right.
legal and appropriate, but it's not required. No one is required to respond or in any particular time or fashion. I don't see this as appropriate to have as a written protocol.
Okay.
That's my opinion. It is individual, I think, how we all respond. To then put it in writing as a protocol then would potentially restrict that individuality of how council members respond to the public. I throw that out to start. Councilmember Dorman.
So I agree with that, and it brings I have a general question. Are these protocols for us? Or,
Yes.
or so they aren't
Town
really,
council.
they are available to the public, and they should be, but they are not public-facing specifically. It's guidelines, our internal guidelines, kind of.
Yes.
I would say that's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
They're yours.
Well, I have a question on that. So we're talking specifically about agenda items?
This was where it related, this is what it related to as an agenda item.
Okay, so I think Gary wants to talk. Let's just see what Gary has to say, because I'm very confused
Okay,
about
so
this and ex parte communication.
This is what I'm worried about.
Oh, yeah, it's
This-
separate, it's separate than that.
So before, Gary,
than
before you
that
get into this,
topic.
this is what I worry about. We have 19 pages of this. And if we're going to start analyzing every single one of these 19 pages,
Sorry.
we're going to be here a while. So I'm not sure if we want to go, how best to really kind of respond to this. If we have something that Gary can elaborate on this first item, but let's all be aware of what the task at hand.
It sounds like there's a later item on this as well. I think there was a request for the council to consider a policy on ex parte communications with applicants who might come before the council, and a possible policy that would contemplate disclosure of those communications before the council decides on that matter. So if it's not part of this first item, but I know that that was a specific request.
Would it be helpful if you just moved to the discussion and direction items, and if you have comments on the other ones, or you want to change some of the other ones, would that streamline the process?
It would streamline the process. I think if that's going to give you the kind of direction you want from us, I mean, if we need to go through all 19 pages, we'll do it.
Okay.
But it seems.
I think 19, there's 19 pages, but I think there are not that many changes. It's just the way they're formatted makes it look longer than what it really is.
I've been to a council meeting. We'll go through all 19.
Okay, all right. So, I'll leave it up to you, Mayor. You'd
So,
like to.
However you need us to give you direction.
Okay.
If we need to go every item, some of them will go quickly, I think. They're just a few word changes in some of these. Like 2.5, does anybody have a problem with the language change?
No.
Maybe not. Okay, there we go. Now we're really rolling.
There's two.
Did we get through item 1.2, though?
No.
It's just updating with the current strategic plan language. I assume that would be okay.
1.2.
No, the very first item. I don't know that.
Yeah,
My proposal was we need no written language about.
there's one above that item that's in a skinny line that you might not be seeing,
Strategic plan
1.2.
vision.
Oh. Yes, I agree.
So for going back to this new item with no protocol section, does council want to add anything or leave them as is, and it's up to the individual council member? No new additions, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I was under the impression that we have a procedure. We can either meet with an applicant or not, and if we do meet with them ahead of time, we must disclose it at the time of the hearing. That's what I thought was I think that, is that what everyone else believes?
I agree. I think.
Yeah, and this seems to be just the public. Someone emailed a council member and never heard back from them on something they just wanted to know. And we all decided that that's our prerogative.
Okay,
So
yes.
then we can go on to ex parte when we get down there.
Yes, so we're going to move on. We're not going to add anything for that item.
Correct.
Okay, there's two items for 3.4, just minor changes. The next item is 5.2, due process. This is a discussion and direction item. And that would be regarding due process. And so this is the one, Gary, that you're going to, ex parte communication.
Written requirement of disclosures?
Yes.
So there was a request to bring this forward before the council. There are some agencies that impose this requirement. It's not currently imposed on the town, and it would be self-imposed. There's different ways to set it up. Some agencies require that a council member meeting one-on-one with an applicant where it's expected or it will come before the council to fill out a form that's created by the town that simply says basic information, date, who you met with, basic information like that, so that the rest of the council and the public is aware of meetings that have occurred. This typically happens at larger state agencies. You see this frequently at like The Coastal Commission has this requirement. It's sometimes in the news, and you guys have read about it. There are also smaller agencies that adopt similar requirements for the purpose of transparency and also for communicating to other members of the council activities that have happened and communications that have happened outside of a formal public hearing where a decision will be made.
We're already obligated to verbally disclose this, as the Vice Mayor stated, correct?
So I'd like a little.
Well, I'd like the answer to my question first.
Well, are we talking about?
I'd like Gary to answer my question before we go on to something else. We're required to verbally acknowledge any communications.
No.
Well, that might be a self-imposed requirement in the current policies. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying I thought by law we already were required, it was our obligation to disclose any meetings with any applicants prior to a meeting.
It's certainly a best practice.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so Councilmember Muller.
But I think the important part, we're talking about public hearings. If it's, this only relates to public hearings. I mean, is that what everybody else? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm not sure that, I think it needs to be very clear that we do all agree to disclose those. I'm not sure if it needs to be in writing, but at what level, that's where it doesn't really talk about, that's my concern. What level of discussion do we need to say for transparency? Yes, I met with Bob on this public hearing item, or do we need to say what we talked about, or what is the consensus that you would recommend we have in terms of just disclosing that we met with them? That's where I think the language is confusing.
So I think there are 3 different policies that were attached to sort of lay out a broad range of how far you could go and what to be disclosed. I will say that from a due process, and this current protocol section goes into it very well, it's a quasi-judicial proceeding, there's due process requirements for a fair hearing. The risk of meeting with applicants outside and the benefit to the council of having a record is that if an allegation comes up later about something being said or a promise being made, you yourself have a record of what in fact happened. And so there are local agencies that impose it for that reason, is that they want to be able to say, look, I created a written record of what was said during that meeting. I didn't make a promise of an outcome. I didn't tell you that I was already going to vote against the project before it came before me. And, we talked about this. And so it's a way of being transparent and also potentially protecting the decision makers in that proceeding.
But that's not what I'm seeing being requested here. We're just supposed to acknowledge we had a meeting, not what the meeting content was.
Right. So as I understand,
how does that guarantee someone who's concerned about a decision being made or a promise being made prior to a public hearing, that's not addressed here?
Well, as I understand it, there's 3 different policies that were attached, and maybe, Steve, you can go into those 3 and where they came from.
Lobbying and legislative.
Oh,
Okay.
Legislative.
Right, my apologies.
I think
Sorry, that's why I'm saying this.
what I can say is I think that it doesn't actually say in this 5.1 and 5.2, it doesn't actually state that the council will verbally announce whether or not they have met with the applicant or whatever the item may be. I think you're doing that for other conflict of interest reasons. So maybe just adding language here that if a council member meets with an applicant on a project or talks to a person about an item that's on the agenda, that you do disclose that. And maybe just adding those words to this section would clarify what Council Member Muller's saying.
That's fine with
Would that
me.
be sufficient?
Fine with me.
All right, then we'll do that, because I would agree with Michelle that when we look at that, that's not, it encourages you to, but
Okay.
it does not say that.
All right, we're moving on. We'll do it. It could be verbal or written or just verbal. I think that's so.
We're okay.
It's verbal. It's on the record.
Yes.
Okay.
But would it be okay if we asked Gary to put something written together in case one of the council member chooses to do that?
Well, we're going to amend this to say verbal.
Okay.
We're going
So
to
that way we can all have our option about whether we
Right,
want to
we're
fill out
gonna-
the
we're
form
gonna
or
indicate
verbally
that
or whatever. Okay.
If it's
All right.
occurred, you will
This is
provide a verbal.
solution to a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we should have,
It should be
way to
consistent,
be
whether it's
consistent.
written.
Well,
or
so is the
what.
council's prerogative verbal only or verbal or written? I'm suggesting verbal only.
I'm fine with verbal.
Verbal.
There you go.
It's-
Verbal only, required.
okay. Next change is minor to 6.1. Then we go
Yay.
down, it goes down to the next page, more just technical updates on an ordinance that council adopted. And then I'm asking to add a new 6.6 for iPad, tablet, standard, and stipend. It's something you've adopted since these protocols were last drafted, so just a change in our practices. The next one that's probably going to be more of a discussion is the town is going to be, this is number 7.
I think there's a
Sure.
typo. It says the second paragraph, the iPad tablet is the town council's personal property. It's the members.
The town
Right. It
council.
doesn't belong to the council. It belongs to each member. Is that?
Correct. It's the
Okay.
member's
I just want to
personal
make sure.
property.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. The next item is 7 under boards and commissions. Town, we're looking to add a new section issuing town-issued emails for boards and commission members, and that's due to the California Supreme Court decision, City of San Jose, for Public Records Act request stating that individuals' personal devices are subject to the Public Records Act if they're discussing town council business. And so to protect everyone and have the ability to retrieve those records if we do receive a Public Records Act request, we feel it would be better managed by issuing a town email.
Everyone comfortable with that?
It's going to be a new number, but it's under number
It's on
7
page
under
5,
boards and...
6. I think that makes sense. It also protects the individual board and commission members.
Okay. Moving on, number 7.2.
Just make sure to deactivate those accounts once they leave.
Okay.
Actually, we can include that. That's a
I'll
good,
put some
that's a good
language in there.
structure. They'll be issued and deactivated upon the expiration of their term of office.
Okay, that is very good.
And
Okay.
the boards and commissions is.
And then the next item under 7.2 is talking about the Form 806, which we did talk about at January 16th, where a council member appoints themselves to serve on a body that receives a stipend. I do want to add this to Section 6 also, so it would be in both places.
I'm sorry, now where are you?
I'm on number 7.2, so
Right.
my hard copy is page 6 and 7 of 19. So it's town council.
Oh, you're on the second page of it.
Yeah, it rolls over. And I want to add more reference to this under Section 6, Council Administration and Professional Development.
I think that's all right with me, as anybody else.
I'm going to propose that if we're all okay with it, we just, we say nothing and you keep going, and if we have a
Okay.
problem.
Okay, 7.3.1, it's just added some language. Excuse me. And then the next item is 7.3.2. There has been a request to discuss how council makes appointments to board and commissions. This was in the context of someone being reappointed and then not too long after resigning midterm due to a job change. The request was, is it within the protocols to offer the seat to the person that was below the threshold in the previous vote, just as a time saver option on applicant and applicant interviews. Currently, we require applicants to, current members sitting on boards and commissions and new ones, they have to fill out an application each time they apply for a board and commission. Sometimes we have difficulty receiving enough applicants, as you know. So it would be up to you if you wanted to go to the next person or if you wanted to try for an additional applicant pool. And this was just a time saver option.
Again, my opinion is circumstances may have changed and somebody new that wasn't available at the original time of the appointment may now be available. I don't know that we should automatically go back to somebody, and we aren't identifying how many months could go by. It could be years later, so I wouldn't propose this.
I agree with that too, because, quite frankly, sometimes if you've got two candidates, you give the person you really think is good the most points, and the other one, you wouldn't really want them necessarily, but you give them 1 point. So, yeah, so, I think it's good to,
Okay,
I
so
would
you want to
prefer
leave it
to
as
re-interview 'em.
currently stands?
Yeah.
Steve, do
Okay.
you have anything to add or not?
I think you've addressed it. I think there's a logic that made sense, but
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I asked you for your answer, and then I shut you off. Sorry.
The town issue emailed, I'll probably add, so there's 7.3.6, a new member orientation. It's just talking about new members will get a handbook, and Yountville representatives to countywide boards will receive orientation from their respective county boards. Adding the email as 7.3.7, that's not on your summary. I'm just letting you know that verbally.
And this is sort of a small thing on 7.3.7. Do we have to go into, there was a Supreme Court case, and this is why we're doing it. Can't we just say our boards and commissions get email addresses?
I kind of like the reference to it. It
Okay.
tells us why we got there. I think
Okay.
that's really important in our legislative history and how we arrive at things. Often we're like, where'd that come from? And this is a
Okay.
point of reference that gets us
She's on
there.
She's on the markup.
5 years from now, who
Do
knows?
we need to then add that to the 6.6 for us and say the same thing? This is the reason we're making it personal property. Do we need to have parallel there?
I think that the personal property is based on your iPad stipend policy that's in place already.
Okay. Well, I
It's a
mean, do we
separate
need to say anywhere? Do we need to parallel that for council communications on personal devices?
What,
I'm just
reference the
asking.
policy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Just
do
reference-
we, I mean, if we're saying it we're proposing to say it for our boards and commissions, do we also need to say the same thing for council, that we have a town email address and this is why? I'm just asking,
I don't think
I don't
so.
see an issue with that. I think for consistency, that's the same way, because that way there's an expectation that the council members use the email for their official business. So I think that makes sense. We can put that in.
Okay. And then the next item is 8.2.3, order of agenda items being adjusted to the current agenda. There was 8.3.7 public hearings. I had a question on, this one's,
Actually, before, I want you to go back to 8.3.3.
okay.
Recognition of proclamations. I would like to have the mayor needs to approve proclamations. Can we get language in there? Since it's,
It says upon approval by the mayor.
no, it says approval from the mayor as to the appropriateness and scheduling of such recognition of proclamations and coordinating the presentation, but I'd like to have in there that we get presentations that are, or proclamations that are presented by national groups that have little or no bearing to us, and then we're left reading them verbatim. And so I'm just saying, I would like to be a part of the analysis of the content.
Following that, I think what we could also look at, John, might be the town's practice is not to do proclamations, the same kind of what you were doing.
Same idea. I would do both. I would add that our protocol is to have local, there needs to be a local connection.
Present and local.
And that the mayor has the option or something to approve content as well as the appropriateness.
and before we
you.
go on, could we back up to 8.1.1, where it says
8.1.1.
8.1.1?
That's not in the
It's not
chart,
in
but
this.
it's
I'm
in
sorry,
the,
okay, sorry, it's regular meetings. It says, no meeting shall continue past the hour of
It's in
10
the
PM.
markup.
it's in the red line markup,
It's in
not
the
in
red
the
line version.
8.1.
18. 18 in the
18,
markup,
okay,
but it is
I'm
not
there.
marked up. No meeting shall continue past the hour of 10, with the exception that by majority vote, extending the final deadline to 10:30, at which time all meetings shall be automatically adjourned. It seems to me we have had a meeting go past 10:30, but
We
maybe
have.
I'm mistaken. So do we need to change this to give us flexibility? 'Cause-
Yes.
Okay.
So we're going to extend the final deadline by 30-minute increments
Yes.
And then delete the sentence, at which time all meetings shall automatically be adjourned? Or do you want to
Yes,
say
I
something?
think-
Okay.
We're in
Okay.
it till the bitter end.
There will be a level of attrition involved in that. It's thankfully rare that it goes past 10:30, but it has happened.
Thank you for that. Okay.
So we're back to
8.3.7, this was public hearings, and there has been a request to discuss findings or resolution of findings and the content and format in terms of how they support or do not support the general plan.
Could I also ask you, Michelle, again, there has been a request. Are these requests coming from council or from
Ye-
the public?
Council.
Okay.
There was only the one at the very beginning from a member of the
Okay.
public. The rest are council generated.
Okay. Discussing
Well,
findings.
I'll speak up. This was my request. I feel that a lot of times when we look at the staff report and it says, we go out of our way to say, does this comport with this and this? I think it's very cursory, and sometimes I think it does not really call out how it complies with the general plan or what, not specific sections, although that would be helpful. But I don't think we do a good job of connecting those sometimes.
And I would propose that that's more of a staff report procedure than a council protocol. My first thought of your comment, I don't think it's, I agree that there might be value in citing those findings. There may also be times when decisions are made that are going to fall outside those exact general plan, the general plan language, so it may be more restrictive than we want that to be.
I'd also offer in this spirit, in this area, that if there's an opportunity or an interest, that I'd work with an individual council member, and Carrie, I know you've been direct on this one. You know, this would be an area that, excuse me, if there is a concern, perhaps you and I can work with staff, and I know you have some strong opinions, and many of you do on other areas. So the intent would be, if there's something you're seeing that we could improve upon, we certainly welcome that opportunity.
Does the council agree that it's something that should be in council protocols? If not, is it appropriate to emphasize in staff level for staff reports, or
Well,
neither?
I guess my opinion is that the general plan is a set of policies. So as long as something is not contrary to a policy, I don't know if we have to, so it's always like, I think it's very important to call out the negative, but do we always really need to call out the positive? It would be an assumption that I would make that staff would not be moving something forward that was specifically not appropriate as per the plan. But to make it appropriate, and then I would make the assumption that if it didn't say that it was consistent with the plan. But what you're talking about is a direct link for like every item, like say our tree we talked about tonight. You would want that related to the general plan, or
Well, I
what am I?
think to the extent the staff report says, is this consistent with the general plan? Is this consistent with the strategic vision? I think, yes, it needs to be specific as to how it is. Now, if we want to say as a council, we don't care if the staff weighs in on that or not, that's another question. But it's a piece of the staff report at this time on most items.
Are you asking for a citing of the part of the general plan in that part of the staff report?
I think you can't always cite a specific chapter and verse, as it were, but I think we could be more specific than we are. And maybe I don't understand what the purpose of those call-outs at the end of the staff report is, and I don't care if it's in the protocol. I just thought this was the time to raise it.
Well, I absolutely appreciate and always pay attention to the staff report and what it says about this is, it reinforces a strategic goal, blah, blah, blah. It could be more fleshed out, but I don't know that it needs to be.
I think it's appropriate that it's in the staff report, and I think adding a citation to the either chapter or specific part of the general plan that might apply, if it's possible to do that. Like staff is encouraged to cite specific general plan content that supports this recommendation. I just don't think it's a council protocol.
Here's what I will say. I think, one, we're getting into a narrower range of staff reports because the reference generally is going to be a planning land use issue when you're dealing with the general plan. So maybe Sandra and I can work with staff and council and identify if there's an adjustment that we could do to footnote some of the relevant general plan sections, because I do think it helps to show the process that's been looked at. So in that same spirit as referencing the strategic plan, is it budgeted? We put those in. So I think we can work on.
So can the council agree that we want this to go back to staff and have you, Steve,
Yes.
and staff figure out a solution in the spirit of Councilmember Dorman's request?
Yep.
Okay, moving on.
Thank you.
We're at page 11 of 19 now.
We're doing really good. So we had a comment about public comment time period, and I think it relates to public hearings and general public comment and being consistent. I'm not on it exactly here, but I have a note that you all don't have for 8.4.1 says five minutes, and then 8.4.4 I think has other certain time limits, and that is related to so this is under meeting conduct, and it's and I have this as a discussion direction item addressing the council generally. We give a 5-minute limitation, and then under land use public hearings we give the applicant 15 minutes, and then all other speakers get 5 minutes, and then the applicant has a 5-minute rebuttal period. Our agenda also has a period for 5-minute public comment. It states it on the agenda, and as we saw tonight, we adjusted that time limit to 3 minutes. So I think we should allow it to stay in the council's purview to adjust the time limit based on the crowd and interest, and to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak. Is there an interest in changing?
That was in the protocols. I thought I read that in the protocols, no?
You may have. I don't recall it right off the top of my head, but these are the 3 sections I'm reading, and the time that it says is 5 minutes.
So what section are we in exactly now? 8 point?
If you want to go to the red line version
Yeah.
of the protocols, we're at 8.4.1, page 24 and 25.
So the county and the County Planning Commission have had this conversation for the last few weeks.
Right.
Gary, is it correct that 2 minutes is the legal minimum requirement?
Yeah, so yes, anything shorter than that, and there can be an argument that you're not actually giving an appropriate amount of
Right.
time for public comment. But as long as the council sets the same amount for everyone at a meeting, it's sufficient.
So what my understanding for the Napa County Planning Commission, certainly involving land use issues, and the Board of Supervisors, their protocols list at least 2, and the expectation is 3 minutes that can be changed at the discretion of the chair of the meeting. So if it's a lightly attended meeting and we feel like going beyond 3 minutes allows everyone to speak, that's my concern. Like tonight, if we have a full house and we see 5 minutes a person, we're not going to get to everybody. So I think if it's 3 minutes and it's at the discretion of the mayor or vice mayor, whomever's chairing the meeting, to extend that either due to size of audience or the discussion, then it's at the discretion of the chair of the meeting. My proposal would be 3 minutes with the ability to go beyond that.
Yeah, I would say 3 minutes is the most common across local agencies generally. And the reason why they don't go below 2 is so that people have a meaningful opportunity to comment.
And I would agree, 2 minutes is not enough. And so that's why I see it at the county level. They've been having this dialogue for the last few meetings. And I believe it would also help to be consistent with our other jurisdictions. So if 3 minutes with the discretion of the chair to extend. And also I think it needs to be, if it isn't already, that each individual is allowed to speak one time, but again, additional may be at the discretion of the chair also.
But should we be putting that timer up consistently every time?
We should.
Yeah, that was
You
my
mean
reason for
the
my
timer.
reason for the
Yeah.
discussion.
So for
is
all
we put
public
the
hearing
yeah,
and
we put
admin,
the timer up sometimes and we don't put it up the
Okay,
others.
so just do it consistently.
Yeah,
Okay.
just
We can do that.
consistency.
And then on 8.4.4, which Michelle also mentioned, it's 15 minutes for the applicant and then spokesperson for the opposition. I mean, how does that fit into our 3 minutes? Is that?
So the applicant and the opposition should, I believe they should have the 15-minute time limit, but I think we could reduce the all other speakers to the 3 minutes. Do you think that's appropriate?
Yes. And
How do you identify a spokesperson for the opposition? Anybody that wants to say they're the spokesperson for the opposition then has 15 minutes.
Well, no, I'll clarify that. The applicant should have more time because in a quasi-judicial proceeding, they have a bigger right to be here in front of you and explain their position. So I would recommend a longer period of time for the
15
applicant.
minutes is fine.
But for everyone else, if you want to keep it to 3, there's no issue with that.
I have a problem with somebody saying they're the spokesperson for the opposition when it's just them wanting 15 minutes.
And I think I have an issue, if it's a neighbor, like if it's a land use and 2 or 3 neighbors want to come and speak, I think there's probably not a spokesperson for the opposition. And I think I would have a problem limiting them to 3 minutes each when the applicant gets 15. I mean, maybe give them 5 minutes each. I don't know.
It's a minimum of 3.
Okay.
At the discretion of the chair.
I want to point out that when we had the special committee to meet and talk about the church and the neighbors did appoint someone to be their spokesperson. And in that case, we knew that was an identified spokesperson. If that's the situation, then, but still, I think that the applicant should have more time.
And again, I would say the chair of the meeting has the discretion to give that
Yeah.
identified opposition representative more than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And the same thing is if 3 minutes, if the protocol says speaking one time only, the chair has the discretion to allow someone to speak for an additional 3-minute period if that doesn't preclude others that want to speak to participate.
That's true. I think I read that in the protocols as well.
Any other thoughts on that section? So are we saying 8.4.4 is applicant 15 minutes, all other speakers 3 minutes, and then I don't know if we need to repeat the same language about chair's discretion for
I would.
additional?
I would add it.
Okay, so the language we just discussed, if you would add it to this.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Next one is 8.5.1, and this is legislative matters considered. So you might want to bounce back and forth between the protocols and the examples that we provided. So is that right?
8.4.9.
Okay.
This is one where we have heard interest from the council in possibly doing something different than is currently crafted, and this is really where we need some guidance and direction from you. In the era that this was drafted, the town had a very limited and non-kind of lobbying legislative a policy approach. So we have provided 3 samples.
One's from City of
One's kind of
Dublin.
extreme.
Yeah.
One's middle. One's middle of the road, and one's very simple. But the first thing is, are you interested in being more involved in legislative and lobbying? So that's the first consensus we need, and then we can go work on how might you want to do it. We certainly think the City of Dublin has a nice, well-detailed policy that goes into it, a little more straightforward than the City of Temecula, but we did that as an illustration to give you a range of how those policies can be crafted. And certainly what we would need to do is establish a framework of how you wanted to approach a legislative platform.
My first thought on this is that if we support this idea, we need to make it clear that it has to be individual council members representing themselves, not on behalf of the entire council. I would still recommend that if we want me or anyone else to represent our entire body of the council, that it needs to be approved by the body of the council.
Mayor, maybe I should clarify. Is this
Yeah.
related to the League of California Cities, when we received the legislative alerts in response to those and doing
Understood.
those letters?
Understood. But
Okay.
if, I don't have the authority to represent the entire council in a response to a request for legislative action.
Right.
And I'm not proposing to do that. So we would individually potentially be able to do that.
We are suggesting, based on your interest, do you want to revisit that? Actually,
That's what I'm saying.
Yes. So
also.
the area is, if you were, one, we have very narrow policy, so you're correct. Right now, you have very little ability to make a statement, or do I, on an action. So the question is, do you want a little broader legislative lobbying policy? And if so, give us some guidance. How that's communicated, Mayor, I think would still be part of that policy in terms of individual comments versus action representing the whole council outcome.
And would you be interested in establishing a legislative ad hoc committee that would work with staff in crafting that legislation that may come up? And if it's in between council meeting times, which oftentimes it is, would either the town manager or the mayor be authorized to sign that after an ad hoc committee has reviewed the language?
I like that idea.
Thoughts, Councilmember Mueller?
Wouldn't that be a standing committee? We couldn't do an ad hoc committee, correct?
That's correct. It would be a standing committee.
That's right.
Makes me a little nervous to have a committee representing the entire council without others' authority. I understand the timeliness of this.
I think, one, I would encourage you, if you have some interest, to take a look, because the Dublin policy, for example, what this does, using that as a reference in there, it doesn't give the two latitude, because what happens generally under this proposal, or the concept, is the council as a whole would identify its key areas of interest and what it wanted to do.
So it's
And
a
then-
legislative platform.
And then we would put and then you would have a platform, and they would be reviewing things for consistency with the platform. And it could very well be like some of the cities adopt the league platform so that there's consistency, but that would all come back to the whole council, and then the ad hoc committee, the standing committee would be working within those frameworks to review things. Again, we're just saying, we've heard from some of you that you have an interest in doing something different. This may be one we need to noodle on separately, and maybe, no pun intended here, but maybe it's worth having an ad hoc committee try to craft something. And I say that because it's a major change, and you saw there are 3 samples, and we're just indicating we've heard from you that you might want to do something different. We're not here giving you a finished product or a proposal at this point.
So I would go back to what I just said, which is I know I would support each of us individually being able to represent ourselves if we feel that's appropriate. What worries me about, even with the Dublin example, where they list their priorities and then even a standing committee could potentially work from within those, they're very vague. And so we just had a legislative alert about a housing bill that was presented by a senator. If we say we support housing, but then there's a bill that takes a position about housing that's not appropriate for us, I worry about a committee representing all of us to make the decision that we support or don't support a particular legislative bill. So individually, I would be comfortable if we all wanted to represent ourselves on legislation as it comes up. I still hesitate to say any one or two of us should represent the whole council without some process. Now, if we say, hey, the League of California Cities contacted us and we send to Steve, our 2 or 3 of us or all of us are interested in taking a position, we can't communicate that with each other outside of a meeting. But if we send it to Steve and he understands that there is an interest, there may be a process where we can communicate that, either holding a special meeting or something.
I'd also encourage you all to go in and read the language, because in that spirit, Mayor, even right now, our current language is real restrictive. And the question is, for example, we're not allowed to, nor shall the council consider any resolution or motion supporting or disapproving any legislation or action pending in the legislature of the state of California, unless such proposed legislation or action, if adopted, will affect the conduct of the municipal business or the powers and duties. And I'm just saying, that's pretty narrow. And we pushed the envelope a little on some of that based on your all's policy statements. And I'm just wondering, we could start incrementally, but if it's something that we've heard from all of you indirectly that this is an area that could benefit some better guidance.
How does the council feel about making sure there's language that allows each of us individually to represent ourselves on legislative positions?
I'd be happy with that.
I concur with that. I think it should be individual, and then if something, as you said, Mayor, if there is something of greater importance, it'll come to us as a council. And I also have no problem with limiting it to conduct of our municipal operations. And otherwise, as a private citizen, we can each do what we want to do.
An example I used recently was last year when there was a countywide effort to get all of the jurisdictions to agree to an immigration policy statement. And that required us to have a conversation about that. We could all individually represent our own interest in that effort, but no one or two of us, I think, should represent all five of us in case we don't all agree on that. Now, it does have a local impact, but it's a national topic as well. So there are going to be times, I think, when we need to just have that conversation as a group.
Right, but I'm also suggesting, and again, if you read the language, it doesn't even give us the guidance that says that should come. And that's why I'm saying I think we need to do some, because again...
So Steve, are you saying that you don't feel that the guidance that we're giving you now about individuals can represent themselves is...
No, I hear that. That's not my question. I'm actually drawing you back to what 8.51 is written. Not, I can write language for you about individuals. 8.51 talks about the council.
Okay.
And it says the council shall not consider, and then goes in and, for example, it doesn't even give the provision for coming back. For example, immigration, that could be hard to argue that that's in the immediate municipal business. So that's where I'm just saying, I think there's an opportunity or a need to review this language, and I hear not a strong interest in going too far away, but I just think, if you guys want to have, if something needs to be acted upon, it comes back for the council as a whole. It doesn't say that right now.
Well, I'd like to propose, I think you brought this up earlier, that we form an ad hoc committee to discuss the policy and what that is going to be, whether it's going to be we're going to represent individual opinions, or if there's a situation that we want to act on as a council, what the process is. Is that the mayor talking to the town manager? So I'm fine with that, so that we can carve out some general parameters about what is our legislative policy. We don't really have one that makes sense. So I'm fine with crafting a legislative policy. Whether it goes as far, which I don't think it is, that we're going to, identify the legislative platform, we will put that in there too. Maybe I would suggest that it will probably put in, we're not going to create a legislative platform, but we should have a legislative policy.
How does council feel about an ad hoc committee to come up with some language for the council to consider?
I'm all for it. I
fine
won't
with
be
that.
on it, but I'm all for it. Let's be clear.
It's fine. It makes it easier to pick to.
I'm coming out first.
All right. So
Yes.
I'd be fine being on that.
I wrote
ad
the one
hoc.
for LAFCO, so I'd be fine doing it. It's just the policy.
All right. Do we want to do that, Councilmember Mueller and myself?
we make a motion on that?
Oh, I don't want to make it. We have to make a motion for an ad hoc committee? All
I
right.
second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. There we go. Somehow
Okay.
that happened. All right. Moving forward.
I would like to add a second paragraph to 8.5.1, and it just adds the League of California City smartphone app, which deals with legislation that's new since the last time these were adopted. And then 8.5.8 is,
On the
go ahead.
8.5.1, though, it says action taken by individual council members must be consistent with the town's legislative platform. I think maybe that should wait until that ad hoc comes through.
okay,
To
so
see if
And
we even have a
also-
legislative platform.
Right. It also offers us the ability to look at some of this and maybe define certain things that the league is doing differently than general lobbying. So I think there's an opportunity to, we'll work on.
so I'm going to strike that
right.
blue language. Is that consensus?
Correct. What I would
Yes.
say, Michelle, is
We'll come back to that.
this one we're going to come
The
back
future.
to as its whole
Okay.
and work on, the ad hoc committee will work on crafting.
Okay.
Okay. Next item is 8.5.8, conflict
Excuse
of
me.
interest.
I'm sorry, I have one question about 8.5.3, which is roll call and voice votes. I was wondering that now that we're doing electronic voting, does that now count as a roll call vote?
It does when it appears. I still think you need to do your verbal. The roll call vote is when the mayor calls for the roll call vote. Can you repeat that number, please?
8.5.3,
5.3.
page 27. I think the question is,
Do we need to
are
do
roll call votes
I would like
moot?
to
No.
strike that.
Yeah, so a roll call vote generally is where the individual vote of each member by name is recorded into the record instead of just saying, we all said aye at the same time.
We may still need that, though, because we've had the electronic voting fail, and
Same as-
there may be an opportunity to have roll call votes necessary.
Right. And I think that the individual, if it does go up there, would satisfy the roll call vote because it would show each individual member.
No, I understand that, but
Okay.
when that doesn't work,
Right.
and we're doing it verbally, there would still be an opportunity for a roll call vote to be called. So I think it's still pertinent.
Okay.
So we're leaving that section as is.
Actually, Michelle, I think reading it, we may need to include the electric vote
Yeah.
because it says a roll call vote shall be taken on the introduction of ordinances. So I think we just need to reference the electronic vote and in
Or
the
a roll
event
call.
of, so I think minor.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Pretty soon we might have retinal votes, you never know. It's gonna happen.
8.5.8,
Thank you.
yes.
Conflict of interest and impact upon duty to vote. No recommendation. We just know this has come up before. If you would like to discuss it and offer feedback, that's great. If it's okay as is, then we'll leave it as is.
So is this a question about the use of abstentions? Is that what the point of this discussion is here?
This is excusing yourself because there's a direct conflict of interest.
Well, this says every member shall vote aye, no, or abstain on every item unless prevented from doing so.
By potential conflict.
But there is a concern that an abstention without a conflict being identified is not necessarily a vote. That's part of the conversation we've been having, correct?
Who said that?
There has
This
been a
came up
concern
from
that abstentions
several
have been
times.
used to not vote when there wasn't a conflict about voting. It was a choice to vote that way rather than a yes or a no vote.
Gary, will you weigh in?
Yes, what is the particular question? Or do we have one?
What is abstain?
talk generally
When you
about this all the
abstain,
time.
what are you saying when you abstain?
When you abstain for a non-conflict of interest purpose and you stay in the room, you are still counted towards the quorum, but your vote does not count towards the required vote for that item to pass. So if, for example, there were only 4 members present, 1 person abstained in the room, and 2 voted yes and 1 voted no, 2 people could pass it unless for some reason state law required 3 votes, as in the case of an ordinance. That's the risk.
But the protocol is you should not use abstention when you just don't want to choose yes or no.
Right.
Where does it say that?
Well, that's what we're talking about.
We might put it in.
Fine. Then we should.
Is this the appropriate place to do that is my first question.
The conversation is, yes, this is why
Okay.
it was at the request of a council member that this was put on for
Okay.
discussion. So we've
Councilmember
been,
Durham, did you have something?
No, I'm fine
we
with
don't
putting
have,
it in.
staff does not have a recommendation or a proposal because this came at the request of an individual council member.
I think an abstention vote, just like a conflict of interest vote, should require an explanation for that abstention. And if there's a legitimate explanation for the abstention, fine. But if it's to not make a decision that's difficult, I'm not comfortable with that.
I would just add, as part of the broader discussion on this, that individual council members, there is a right to vote individually on your conscience. It doesn't mean that it can't be memorialized in here, but I just have to bring it up.
What does that mean?
What it means is, as elected officials, you all have a First Amendment right to vote or not speak, or leave the room or not leave the room. And it's okay to put it in a policy, but I just want to bring it up that if this came down to it and the policy was violated for whatever reason, and
there's no authority behind it.
Correct.
It's a recommendation that we as elected should be making decisions, yes or no, on issues that come before us. We cannot be compelled to do so by the Constitution, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I've seen this at our level as well as at county board levels, and it has made a difference.
Yes.
Especially recently at the county level, where a weighted vote took place and a person abstained that had a weighted vote that swung that vote one way or the other by abstaining and not taking a position. And that's, in my opinion, that isn't an appropriate representation of that vote.
And I've seen that too, and they actually had quite a bit of discussion on the item, and then the person that I'm familiar with said, well, I'm going to abstain because I don't feel like I have enough information. Well, then what was all that discussion about? So having some kind of terminology about what abstaining means, and maybe it can just be a guideline. It doesn't have to be a fact, that generally abstaining means this.
Yeah, Gary just said the Constitution allows you to abstain with no
That you're not allowed to.
no explanation, but what I'm saying is that I'm recommending we have a protocol that says if you're not going to vote up or down, you should explain yourself as to why.
Especially after having the discussion. Sorry.
Yeah.
I really can't get on board with that. I think or I could get on board with every council member has to explain every vote, why they voted yes, why they voted no, why they choose not to vote. I think it's not proper to call out abstentions. And to your point, Councilmember Moeller, if someone says, so what if you have a 30-minute discussion? If a council member wants another 5 pieces of information, then you are forcing that council member to vote no, because it is highly unlikely that the rest of the council will say, we'll hold up everything for that council member. I really think it's overreaching to force people to go on the record about why they're voting, especially if you single out one aspect of it. We all have our duty to our constituents, and I think let that happen in the elections. If constituents don't like it, that people abstain or vote yes or vote no, that will come out at the ballot box.
Well, I think your example is a perfect example of all you would need to do is say, I don't feel like I have enough information to make this decision, but I've heard members in other jurisdictions say, I can't decide, this is difficult, I abstain. And that's not us being elected leaders of our jurisdictions. So whether the exact circumstance has been here or not is not what I'm saying. If you say, look, I'm going to abstain because I feel like this ordinance doesn't have content that I could support or not support, then that's your explanation.
But that's really the same explanation as a no vote. So why don't we just explain all the votes? I'm voting for it because I just think it's overreaching. We are elected officials. We all have our duties to our constituents and to one another. I don't think anyone up here abuses the right to abstain, and I think it is a right, and I think we don't have to explain it. That's just my personal feeling.
Other members have any thoughts?
I agree with Councilmember Dorman.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I just don't understand, when someone is abstaining, what if there's something that we could do to help have. I'm not saying we should always, have a 5-0 reading on anything, but if there is really something that we are missing that could possibly even help some of the other council members, and what I'm hearing, which I've never really understood before, you just say, well, I'm going to abstain. If you don't really know, I don't know if we're doing our duty to ourselves to not have more discussion. That's where, so I think it's someplace kind of in the middle for me, that just to say you abstain without, helping your fellow council members understanding what it is that, because maybe we might have not thought of that ourselves, or we could share in that. I think that's what, I think would be helpful.
According to this protocol, every member should vote, and those options are aye, no, or abstain.
Right. We're discussing whether we want to change that language.
Right. And
Durham, do you have any thoughts?
I do, but they're pithy and they'll come across very negative, so I won't talk.
Okay. I do think that what we have done, and different councils have done this consistently here in Yountville, is explain votes prior to taking those votes. So I do think there has been opportunity taken almost every time we vote to explain why you do or don't support an item. Whether you say something and then vote differently, that's still your right also. But so I think that we already kind of do what you're saying about explaining every vote. Maybe we don't need to change the language, but even this conversation right now is letting all of us know that we want to make sure that we are representing our community as best we can. And if there is an occasion when someone needs to abstain, then that's on them to choose to do that. But we're not up here to abstain on votes when they're difficult. We're here to make decisions yes or no. And so if there's a time where one needs to abstain, then one should abstain.
I think I've also taken a look while you guys were reading this again fresh while you were having the conversation, and I think the title of the section may be causing more of the problem than the language, because if you read the paragraph, it really talks about the duty to vote being an aye, no, or abstain on every item, and then it goes into conflict of interest. This is really a conflict of interest section, and the fact that it can have an impact on duty to vote rather than duty to vote. So maybe we need just to clean up the title, and that will
or
help
separate
resolve.
the two ideas.
That may be something, I think, in reading it, because it talks about, then it goes right into any member who believes he or she has a conflict. So, I think we're talking, this really goes into providing guidance about conflict of interest and responsibility to identify the conflict rather than duty to vote.
Well, taking another take at Gary's example, what I would hate to see happen is we have 5 members of the council, an applicant comes forward, there's a 2-2 vote, and the 5th vote is an abstention. And by that abstention, that application fails. And I don't know that that's fair to the applicant to not have all 5 members of the council represent a position.
And actually, Mary, you're leading into, which is why this really talks about the governance here is not a general vote, it's when you have a conflict of interest. And I think we've been interpreting this too broadly, and it's actually a very narrow, because the provision underneath it talks about there are rare exceptions when one of you could be compelled to vote, or we draw straws, when there's an identified conflict of interest and enough people need to participate. So maybe staff can work on rephrasing it, but this is really a conflict of interest language, not duty to vote.
I would suggest that we split those two topics into 2 separate paragraphs.
Well, Michelle, Gary, and I will play with that. I think we've got some ideas, but with listening to you, and if you guys are hearing what we're saying, this language, we can talk about the general duty to vote, responsibility, and then we can talk about when identified conflict of interest.
Well, I think and maybe you can talk about this too, because if you say that an abstention is actually voting, that's what it looks like here, but it's the null case, so it really isn't a vote. And so I think that situation should be explained.
I think we're going to separate the two, because I want you to go in, because this one talks about you have the duty to vote, with it being one of those 3. So we can talk about what an abstention is, but in this particular case, it really does come back to identified conflict of interest if you have one, and it talks about what you have to do.
Well, but
Gary?
if you had a conflict of interest, haven't you had to recuse yourself?
Right, yeah. I don't know how much more detail to go into here. I guess the way I'm reading this is everyone should vote up or down or abstain unless you have to leave the room because you're legally required to do so. That's how I'm reading that section.
That's exactly, I think it's narrower.
Yeah.
That doesn't address the duty to vote in terms of making an up or down vote.
No, I think it expresses a general policy that each member of the council should vote yes, no, or abstain unless you cannot do so.
And I think what I would say,
That's different than what you're saying.
and what I would say, Vice Mayor, is some people have interpreted this as a duty to vote rather than being guided by the conflict of interest first.
Well, clearly, we're not arguing the conflict of interest piece of this.
No.
No one is. We're talking about whether an abstention should be, we have to allow it. It's a question of what is the obligation of the five of us in terms of making a decision that impacts an application or whatever.
So we really cannot disallow it.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you.
So I guess we just leave it, it's up to each council member's, individual decision-making and how they feel they represent themselves. If an abstention is the way they want to represent themselves, then we're obligated to allow that. It's just, again, I look to an applicant who comes here and then leaves with a non-decision that is a denial based on not getting 5 or however many votes there
That's a
are.
hypothetical.
Well, and I think that the way
It's
that
a very
this,
real hypothetical.
We just had it
and I think the way
a couple months ago.
that this language is written is telling. There's other sections of these policies and protocols that say shall or may,
Right.
and this uses a should. And I think that that was intentional because it's in the context of the voting of the council members.
Okay, I think we've talked through this one quite a bit.
I just want to say, I think you make a really good point, Mayor, that the discussion up here tonight is very helpful to all of us in our individual discharge of our individual duties. And I appreciate the time that we've been able to give to this. Thank you.
Yes.
I think this also carries over to our boards and commissions that are making similar decisions. So maybe that conversation gets carried over by staff or however. Okay. Next, Michelle?
Next item is going to be 9.1. There's minor changes, but then there's also, I'm getting to, 9.1, just minor changes, no involvement. 9.2, just minor changes. And then we're getting to 9.7. This is another discussion item, and this is regarding the media and press releases. So there's been a request to review communication with the media in general and possibly adding language related to emergencies. And that's 9.7 of the protocols.
Page 35.
And again, this was feedback from some council members without direct language or proposals, just a comment that perhaps it should be looked at and discussed.
Well, we certainly saw there was a variety of communication happening in October. It became challenging in some cases when unofficial information was being shared, mostly by members of the public. Then it comes down to, should there be a limitation to whom can represent the town?
I thought we had that.
That's the conversation we're having right now.
Okay.
Should it be only the town manager and/or the mayor, for example, or should all council members be allowed to represent the town? One of the concerns is, in that specific circumstance, which we hope never to repeat, maybe all of us were giving communication to our neighbors, to friends on social media, and sometimes it was accurate and sometimes it was maybe not accurate. And so the concern is when any of our names is attached to something, people assume that it's accurate. Maybe that information is no longer timely or it is no longer accurate. We're hearing reports of where fires were and were not, and that just creates difficulty in the community. That's a very unique and kind of emergency situation, but that does show the need for clarity.
Well, it was that day, I was asked at the community center, a woman was very, very concerned and kept saying that the fire had jumped Silverado Trail. So Sergeant Holman happened to drive up, and I asked him about it, and he said, I'll go look right now. He went out, looked, and came back with the answer. No, it hadn't. That's the only time I think I gave.
And I'm not looking to cite specifics in that setting, because that was
Yeah,
really kind
that
of a
was it,
unique
yeah.
setting. But going forward, there may be less natural disaster conditions that still mean we should be funneling information through one or two voices. That was, at a broader county level, that was very specifically controlled during that October period, where we had 30 different electeds and other partners there, but there was a single voice that was sharing information, whether it was the Sheriff's Department, CAL FIRE, the county. We were not all going out and necessarily making up our own version of the press release.
Well, I would feel comfortable under normal circumstances for that voice to be you and Steve, the mayor and the town manager. But in the case that you would not be able to, then it would be the vice mayor and the town manager in concert. That's how I see it.
I think it makes sense to do it that way. I think of other more specific local circumstances when there was an incident that involved an injury of a construction worker in town and streets were blocked and things were happening. The media was coming around and asking anybody they could find what happened. Well, we don't want to tell them the wrong thing. And by controlling who can speak, then you kind of control that message.
Two separate things that I think you need to look at. One is an interview response to a media inquiry, and the second is actually the crafting and the distribution of an official press release. There are two, in my opinion, they're two very distinct circumstances, and as individual council members, you will be approached on a regular basis by a reporter asking some of your thoughts or comments. That's a little bit different than the actual preparation and presentation of a press release and the content. So maybe we need to add that, some guidance on the interview or the reporter comment. But most of the structure in the current policy is geared towards the actual crafting and distribution. I'll also remind you that we do use ad hoc council committees and certain things, and there's events or areas where a council member or the mayor may be the chair of something in an official capacity, and they may take a lead in crafting the press release. You all have been very good. We actually internally, for the majority of the press releases, they're written. You guys may have some input. They're crafted. Management team, they go out in our official process. You are all given copies when they go out. So it's just really, for us, again, not knowing, and this actually had several members express an interest. So if there is something broader you want us to clean up or change, we need some input from you on what that might be.
Comments from anyone? I think one of the concerns that I have would be if an individual council member was going to speak to media or post any kind of information, that it go through the town manager before that happens, if possible. Some things might be very timely, but I think it's important that we make sure that any information we're sharing is accurate. And I think that might be the most reliable way to do that.
I think it really kind of comes down fundamentally to freedom of speech and talking to the press. I think we can carve certain things out, like a press release. That makes sense that it goes through a formal channel, but there's going to be a lot of different circumstances that kind of pop up when, the press comes and asks you a question. You can't say, I can't talk to you. If you really know that something is going to occur, like sometime in early March, I think it's appropriate to say that, and then you could follow up and give them an exact date, and that's what we're talking about. But I do think we need some ability to be able to respond to questions from the press.
Other comments, thoughts?
So I have a question, because during the fire, I watched the county briefing, and then I put on Nextdoor and on my Facebook page my notes from the county briefing. So under what you're suggesting, would I have run that through the town manager before posting?
Well, that's what we're discussing, whether
Yeah.
we need to do that, or is the timeliness in a circumstance like that going to override what might be a normal process? And maybe there are extenuating circumstances like that that would allow more freedom of communication. If Steve or I are, busy with some commitment for an hour or two, and it's more important to get the information out, we need to know if that's appropriate.
I agree with that.
But that's what we're talking about right now.
I mean, it's a tough call, because I think we certainly, a lot of our protocols speak to once the council takes an action, we all get behind it, no matter how we voted, and so that should come out in our press releases and things like that. But on the other hand, we all are individual citizens who might have differing opinions on things, and I'd be interested in more discussion. I do think what we have now speaks only to press releases, and we might want to try to craft something that speaks to, if you're going to speak on something outside of a press release and outside of a council meeting that goes to the media or wide distribution, then we need to make a very specific mention that I'm speaking as a citizen, or I am not speaking as a representative of the town.
There actually, if I can draw your attention to page 36, it starts, when reporters seek information that requires an interpretation, an opinion, or information that is not readily available or routinely provided to the general public, and of which council members may not be aware, the request shall be referred to the town manager or department head, or in their absence, the town clerk. Council should be notified of any major news interviews.
What does it say?
I'm just saying, I'm reading what's
Page
currently
36.
there, and it is a little outdated. Page 36.
Paragraph at the top underneath the red.
Because it could be appropriate that we add guidance for individual council member comments in an interview and talk about that. This particular one just sort of is hanging out there, that paragraph.
It's not really understandable of what it covers. So a little better guidance would be welcome, I think.
What I also think is lacking guidance here is social media communication.
It's got a small reference, Mayor, but I would agree. Perhaps we add this to the
ad hoc
topic
committee
list of the ad hoc committee, because it requires a little more work.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Moving on.
That concludes your comments, unless you have any additional items you would like to add that were not covered here tonight.
Are there any additional items to add that have not been covered tonight? Any member of the public have any comment or still paying attention? No? Okay.
Did we put your
Thank you everyone for your comments and feedback. Appreciate it.
Got through all 19
Thank
pages.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Staff informational reports. I don't see any here.
I just
Steve,
have one
very quickly.
brief comment, which is to acknowledge our Australian exchange delegate, Laura Nichols, has been witnessing American democracy in practice. We welcome her.
You picked a good one tonight, Laura.
At least it's not 10.
Not over yet.
It's early yet.
We got here at 3:45.
That's
I will point out, Laura is visiting, just for clarification, visiting us from Ipswich Council, which is just outside of Brisbane in Queensland.
We want to come and visit you.
Thanks for enduring the entire meeting. Somebody must have promised you a beverage after this or something. Council meeting reports, comments, agenda items. Napa County Flood Control did meet today. The one item was the acceptance of a clean audit from 2016-17, so that was welcome news. NVTA, Councilmember Dorman, do we have any news to report from that meeting?
Well, we haven't met, but would you like me to talk about the trolley meetings here in Yountville at this point?
Sure, please do.
Okay, so we have had 4 meetings, and there will be one more at the Bella Vista Clubhouse February 10th at 10:30. I have attended all of the meetings so far except one. It's been a really good turnout, I think, and the interesting thing is we have heard, and NVTA staff heard, many of the same questions and challenges across all of the populations that we've been out to. They include whether there can be reservations, holiday service, the wait time, both on hold and for the trolley, whether there can be improvements to the application. Those, I think, have been heard loud and clear. There is a commitment from staff to work through those in the short term. And again, if you haven't been to one, please go. You get one-on-one assistance on how to install the app, or if you have it, how to best utilize it. Right now, about 50% of Yountville's rides are coming through the app, and we do have the largest ridership of the trolleys, so kudos to us. And know that NVTA staff is very dedicated to working this through with us.
One of the ongoing conversations also at the NVTA board level is the use or not of the callback service that can be used through the telephone service. Some jurisdictions are opposed to that because they feel like it's been poorly operated, and others, I think we've expressed our residents' interest in having that available. In some cases, you're better off staying on hold than leaving a callback number that may or may not happen. So that's one of the features that's under review. Thank you. Upper Valley Waste Management, is there a report?
We didn't have we canceled our meeting in January, but maybe I'll take the time to give you an update on LAFCO. LAFCO met yesterday, and we have a new consultant who's helping us write our MSRs and our SOIs, and that's not going well. So now we're going to be looking for another consultant. So we really didn't like the product that with the MSR from American Canyon. So we're going to be redoing that. The county was very upset about the county service area number 3 report as well. This is the area that's between the northern portion of American Canyon and the city of Napa, which happens to be county service area 3. So it's a little complicated how that even exists, but we're going to have a good report nonetheless. So this will probably also affect the timing of St. Helena's MSR SOI as well.
She's still not done?
No, she's gone. Her contract expired, and Elliot Malberg was the next consultant, so we're going to be looking again for another consultant.
Okay, Watershed Information and Conservation Council, Vice Mayor?
First, I thought I would report on January 18th. I attended the League of California Cities. I now am part of the Revenue and Taxation Committee, and so it was all about revenue and taxation, which was good. The governor unveiled his 2018-19 budget that included $4.5 billion in new funding for state and local transportation projects from league-supported SB 1. There is a movement to try and get enough votes to repeal SB 1. They do not, the governor and other representatives of the league do not feel that that will be successful, but that is going on. And there also is a great deal of concern about the proposed transportation and infrastructure projects that have been talked about from Washington, because they are planning to take, I think that I heard that they are planning to put in 30% and collect all the rest from the states and cities across the country for that. But Anyway, he delayed expenditure plans on an estimated $600 million generated through legalized recreational cannabis sales until the May revise, because they're still they're looking at how to deal with it because of the uncertainty, and also they felt that those in the black market will not opt to operate in a legalized environment. That came out of it. And then in the Watershed Information and Conservation Council, which for the first time we met here in our council chambers. So we elected the chair and vice chair and had presentations again on different aspects of fire recovery. And one of the things that came out of it, which I thought was very good, was that while the trees and things had burned, they were looking at the watershed, at the land in the watershed, and they said that the land had not been burned sufficiently to, have a big impact in the future, which is a good thing. And then I wanted to do a shout out to our Joe Taliabachi, did a great presentation for everyone, so thank you very much, Joe, on the Hopper Creek project.
I'm sure there were slides.
Councilmember Durham?
Yeah, I want to, everybody in the audience, the staff, please. Councilmember Dorman and I, thank you, are excited that we've met with the town and put together a cannabis roundtable that will be happening hopefully in the end of February. And very excited about the group of people that we have coming as well to participate, to answer all of the town's questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of things. I also want to acknowledge the effort not only by Joe Taliabachi, but everyone else with the Yountville Kiwanis on a very successful crab feed last week. Thank you for that. Also, any short film fans, the Yountville International Short Film Festival is kicking off its first year this Thursday through Sunday in 3 different locations here in Yountville. We also had, we have a Black History Month program tomorrow at the Veterans Home, where I will be speaking along with Interim Administrator Studer will be speaking to the assembly there. Congratulations to the new officers of the Allied Council. Elections were just held this last month. And also just, I referenced it in my State of the Town, but I did speak to the Assembly Veterans Affairs Committee last week. They also heard from Secretary Bassiani of Calvet and members of the Little Hoover Commission, where conversations continue about updating facilities, living quarters, and services at the Vets Home. And also, we continue to discuss the possibility of bringing housing development onto the campus to support employees, veterans, and other members of the Napa County community. So those things were all happening. I believe our business is complete for tonight. With that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment to our next meeting, which is February 20th at 6 p.m.
So moved.
Is there a second? I'm sure there is.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.